I hate humans. Humans are bad for Earth. We need to get rid of all of the humans on Earth because without humans, Earth would be a better place. Dude, we are the fruit of the Earth.
Yeah. Well, it's that type of person you said earlier where they don't acknowledge they have darkness, right? They're putting all the blame on someone else.
That's right. It's the Greta Thunberg.
Yes, exactly.
So shift your perception. What happened to me today is the best thing that ever happened to me. And rebuild.
No matter what it is.
They don't tell you when you're going to crash that you're going to crash until 1 second before you actually hit something. I'm dead serious. And right before we hit, they were like, brace, brace, brace. And everyone was like screaming. It was out of control. And I remember looking back at the plane and going, how in the heck did I make it through that?
What do you think about this idea that Bitcoin could be the Philosopher's Stone?
So how all this applies to Bitcoin, in my mind, is that it is referencing an entirely new era of how humanity, I'm actually getting emotional on this.
Welcome to the What is Money Show, a podcast about wisdom, intelligence, and meaning. If this is your first time listening, I strongly recommend you go through the first 9 episodes, which are my series with Michael Saylor that lay much of the groundwork for the concepts we explore on this show. Thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I think the best place you can start is episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The WiM podcast is 100% sponsor-based. I strive to be selective about the sponsors I work with and only partner with those that showcase values that align with the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, and self-sovereignty. So I'll do a few ad reads right here at the top of the show, then a few in the middle, and I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Satoshi Nakamoto, you are a man that speaks Japanese.
Yeah.
You just looked up, I don't know, the root word or
I looked at the characters.
The Japanese characters.
Satoshi. Mm-hmm.
And what was the derivation of that?
So I always remembered Nakamoto. Nakamoto is like coming from a field.
Yeah.
Right. And the characters are, would be into, or Naka is in the center of, in the middle of. Moto is like field.
Yeah.
And I didn't remember what the meaning of Satoshi was, or what the Chinese characters were related to it, because they use the Hanmun or Hanja, or as they say it in Chinese, but it would be kanji in Japanese. Mm-hmm. And the kanji character for it for Satoshi means wisdom. Mm. So wisdom inside or from the field, the unified field, which I think is a fascinating name when you think about what Bitcoin actually is. And that now it can link all the way back to the simplicity of the beauty of the wisdom from the field. That's kind of mind-blowing.
That is beautiful, especially considering that Bitcoin has energized such a philosophy around it. All right, and philosophy, Philia Sophia, the love of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And then Satoshi Nakamoto's name. I've never heard this before. It's the first I'm hearing it, but wisdom from the field.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing, actually. I'm like still trying to grok it, to be honest. It's like, because the implications, every time someone says, oh, I sent you a Satoshi, it's like I sent you a wisdom. freaking love it.
The other thing I saw was the word sat, actually, is the Sanskrit word for truth.
Like
So
Sadhguru.
Yeah, so like sats are units of truth in a way.
Units of truth. That's
Yeah.
right. So it also has that similar meaning. Wisdom
Yeah.
is truth in a way. Right? It's being able to see the various aspects. And I used to collect facts in my life,
Yeah.
FACT.
Okay.
And then I realized over time that I was merely collecting facets, that my perspective was only one facet. Maybe I could see 2 or 3 facets of truth. But if I really wanted to be able to see the full truth of something, I had to be able to see and maybe sum up the collective aspects of all the subjective possible perspectives of that. You have a crime that happens on a road somewhere and 30 eyewitnesses see it. Then they go to the court and they testify what they saw. And everyone's stunned when they all have different versions of the story.
Right. Of course.
Because we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
Yes.
So there's these hidden little gems all over the place, like Satoshi Nakamoto, which is literally the wisdom from the field, the unified field of consciousness. Wow, that's a mind blower. I'm literally trying to grok that still.
So wisdom and truth, and there's a deep relation between these two things. Can we try and put this age-old philosophical problem, trying to put words around very basic concepts? I should say essential, not basic, essential concepts like wisdom and truth. How would you define wisdom and how would you define truth? And what is the relationship between the two?
So when I think about truth, I think about the way I learned about truth, which is really this notion that there was only one objective truth.
Right.
And I spent the first 45 years of my life really clinging to that because I thought I came here to be a better judge, right? A better discerner of what is truth.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize until I hit my mid-40s. And it's kind of a funny story. I went to Hong Kong and I was CEO of Bausch & Lomb at the time. So this is a couple of years before I met you. We randomly met in a restaurant because someone you were with had worked with me.
Yeah.
And I basically went to Hong Kong to meet with this guy who was applying, and he'd worked for the company before, to become the country manager again for Thailand. And we had a large operation in Thailand, probably 800 employees or something like that. So it's an important role, important job. So I wanted to meet the guy, but the reason why it was more important to me is because this guy had worked for the company 5 years prior and had left. He was a country manager and had left, and he made his mentee the replacement for him. So that was his succession plan. Well, after 5 years of being in a Buddhist monastery, in a 5-year vow of silence, which was his sabbatical, it was a long time to be gone, didn't talk to anybody, I was the first person to talk to him again.
5 years of silence.
And not only that, but he was going to come back into the job that he left. So that means that the person that had replaced him very successfully for the prior 5 years was going to have to step aside and let his former boss be the boss again. Now, that's very rare. You wouldn't see that in the pharmaceutical world in particular. You wouldn't see it in most industries, in fact. So I wanted to talk to this guy right away. And I was talking, I was standing next to him in a salad bar. And I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." And I said, "So what was it like to be in the 5-year vow of silence?" I didn't want to bombard him with too many questions or anything, but he just looked at me. I said, "What did you learn?" And he said, "There is no duality. There is only oneness." So this was sort of like my white rabbit moment in Neo in the Matrix, right? And I was like, "What do you mean by what?" I'm like, "What are you even saying?" And so on the flight home, I was contemplating that. There is no duality. There's only oneness. And I remember taking out a pad of paper and I was like, okay, I'm going to write down every antonym relationship I can think of. So it's like light, dark, love. What's the opposite of love? Is it hate?
Indifference.
Is it indifference? Is it fear? Sometimes people ascribe to it. Yeah. What is it, right? So it's this very difficult thing to understand. And then I started thinking, well, what about other words like arrogance and humility, right? And I started noticing something very, very strange, because every time I started putting something on a linear line, like Democrat versus Republican or communist versus fascist, I realized that in every case, it was exactly the same thing, just gone too far in one direction. So if someone was communist, I started thinking about communism and how communism always starts off with social democracy. But then what happens is they always devolve into fascist dictatorships. Always. I can't even think of one example when it hasn't. And you could look at North Korea, whether it's Kim Jong-un or Kim Il-sung before him, they come across as saying, okay, yes, we're the father of a social democracy movement, but then they end up becoming, lifetime leaders their paintings are plastered everywhere. And then I realized, the only way to know if a country is fascist or not is by the number of times you see the picture of the father figure, right? Just as you're driving in the car along the road. And I've been to many of those types of countries.
When they get deified, basically.
When they get deified.
Yeah.
So I started realizing that, okay, if I go to the left and I step too far left, I end up on the right. And it's not different than how we look at planet Earth.
Right.
If you only have a very limited viewpoint, you could think, okay, well, I can only see this far, and I don't know that there's something beyond that. So it could be an ice wall, or it could be whatever it is, right? Dragons be there. But if you get on a plane and you fly around the world going west from California, eventually you end up coming back to the same spot, but coming from the east. So I realized that the linear depiction, right, of this analogy, right, or looking at this is actually incorrect, and that it should be a circle at the very least. Maybe it's a sphere. Maybe it's actually a sphere. And I started realizing that everything was like this, without exception. So then I started also realizing that what one would call the other, when someone calls out arrogance in someone, almost universally, every time I noticed someone calling out arrogance in another person, it was the person that was calling him out was the most arrogant person. So it was almost the mote in their own eye that they couldn't perceive. So that's when I started realizing what I was thinking was truth, maybe not necessarily truth. Maybe it's a limited aspect because I can only see one aspect of it. And this reminds me of what Alan Watts says, it's like an eye can't see itself without the aid of a mirror. A fire can't burn itself. A light can't illuminate itself. A tooth can't bite itself.
Right.
Consciousness has to separate itself in order to perceive itself.
Yes.
So then you end up with, because we all see the universe through our own lens of conditioning bias, we all have an entirely different experience. You and I could have the exact same experience. Two brothers growing up as twins with identical circumstances could have entirely different lives based on how they perceive what happened to them, because it's not what actually happens to you that happens to you. It's what you believe happens to you that happens to you. So truth then you start to ask, well, what is there one objective truth? Is it even possible to have one objective truth? And that's when I started to realize maybe the whole purpose of being here is because that one objective truth is the only thing that connects all of it. As Buckminster Fuller called it, the metaphysical gravity is love. The thing that binds all of it and brings it all together is the love that underlies all of it. So being right became less important to me than expressing love.
Wow.
That became my truth. That became the most important truth for me after I went on this long journey looking at all of these different things. And to me, ultimately, that was born and gave birth to, at the same time, concomitantly, wisdom. So wisdom is being able to see both with the left eye and the right eye. So our left eyes connect through the optic nerve to our occipital lobe on the right brain. And our right eye, through the optic nerve, connects back to the occipital lobe on the left side, right? It's if you're right-handed. And so the left part of our brain is for analytical type thought. It's for mathematics, right? It's for the natural sciences. It's for all the material world. And I thought I was living at that time in a world that was objective and material because I was seeing it through the lens of my left brain. My right brain was pretty inactive. And the right brain is where you get your creativity from. It's where the seat of music is. It's where the seat of the visual arts is. And so on this left part of my brain, I have mathematics. On my same exact point on my right side of my brain, I have music. So you could say that math is the abstract form of music. It's just the way I'm perceiving it. And geometry is right in the center of my brain. And so geometry becomes the music that I experience with my eyes. So are we just perceiving through different lenses of viewpoints? And if we're only masculine, we're only left brain. Wisdom comes when we're able to see it with both. So you have, in Egyptian mythology, you have the left eye of Horus, which connects to the right brain, and the right eye of Ra, which connects to the left brain. So you now have the ability to perceive through the rational lens and the irrational lens. You can think and feel at the same time. And that made me think of something that was hugely profound to me. When the heart thinks and when the mind feels, the river of wisdom flows. When you're able to see it with both eyes, the lens is now stereoscopic. You actually get a whole third eye to be able to see through.
Yes.
And that's what the third eye is really about.
Wow.
It's seeing the wisdom with both your eyes.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's this assimilation of multiple perspectives, I assume, right? And because this not only occurs in your eyes, right? You need to assimilate the left eye and the right eye to get one clear image. But we also need to assimilate the viewpoints of other people, right? To coordinate our actions effectively, to build companies, cities, et cetera, societies. What is it? And I said something to you about this offline, because that when you brought that up, it reminded me of this quote from a famous U.S. naval general whose name escapes me, but he said that the job of the captain is to see the ship through the eyes of the crew.
Yeah.
And that paralleled something closely to what you were saying about God, actually, that God was trying somehow related to these deep concepts of wisdom and truth. God as a metaphysical being, I don't know if that's even the right term, quality of nature, something like that, is experiencing itself through us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
it's kind of a trip.
Yes. It sounds almost crazy. But the other thing that came up for me there, well, I guess we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but it was that God is often described as a being that is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, right? So all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-present everywhere. Well, what does a limitless being like that lack? And the answer is limitation itself. Therefore, finite humans are made in the image of God so that we can almost complete God in a way, which is paradoxical because he's limitless.
Yeah.
So how could you complete a limitless being?
Which is also beautiful.
Yeah, but he lacks limitation. Therefore, we are made in his image to complete him. And again, you use this gender specific thing like him, but it's like, it's not really that. It's
right.
I don't know the words for it exactly, but
I think it's,
I guess he's the captain of the ship, to go back to the earlier analogy.
Yeah. And the captain can also be female.
Yes.
The way I see it is this, that there's nothing in the universe that is not God. I believe all of it is divine. And that this is founded on mathematical principles.
Does that mean all of it's alive? Is that another way of saying that?
All of it's conscious. The darkness, the light. We talked about this earlier. Darkness is not the absence of light. From a physics standpoint, it's not. In reality, it's just not. Darkness is the opposite or absorbed condition of the reflection of light. So whenever we have a reflected color, we also must have an absorbed color. If you see a color, someone's wearing a red shirt, it's equally blue because the blue is the absorbed color that's underlying it. We're just not perceiving it.
Right. The red is, everything's absorbed other than the red. That's basically
right.
how sight works. Yeah.
Yeah. But the peak of that other absorption is going to be blue in the wave of light. Right. So if you see color wheel analysis, that's what you see. So the other, white light, white incandescent light is the reflection of all color. Yeah. Right. And black is the absorption of all color. So that means that you cannot have the incandescent white light without also having the blackness that's somewhere there. The light needs the darkness as much as the darkness needs the light. So both sides of this equation, of this yin-yang scenario, are interplaying and working together. And we can't have one without the other. That's why we have polarity in all things. Right. And this goes back to basic Hermetic principles. And so I think you brought up this question about philosophia, right? Philosophia is the lover of wisdom. So if you think about the Sistine Chapel, have you been to the Sistine Chapel?
Not yet, no.
So when you go to the Vatican, go to the Sistine Chapel, and you look up at the ceiling, you see Adam reaching out, that famous, mural that's there on the ceiling.
Kind of
And-
lazy finger coming out.
And a lazy finger of God pointing out to him. Well, if you look at that, you'll notice, first of all, that the legs of God are shaped the exact same way, like in mirror reflection of Adam, right? And they're both kind of pointing to each other across a mirror, in a sense. But then you'll notice there's like a curtain around God. Looks like a curtain. And there's a woman that's underneath him, right? There's a woman that's underneath his arm, this beautiful young woman, in fact, got red hair. And her name is Sophia, wisdom, okay? And then there's little cherubs all around. If you ask yourself the question, what is that curtain around God? It's actually a brain. It's the perfect shape of the cross-section of a brain. And where God is having Sophia under his arm and she's crossing the other direction is making an X. Their two bodies are making the X. That X is where the right eye optic nerve intersects with the left eye's optic nerve and crisscrosses at the brain and makes a chi shape, pronounced he in Greek. So this chi shape is the optic chiasm, and it intersects right at the pituitary gland. So you could say that the left brain is like the alpha because it's the rational thought seat. The right brain is the creation and the feminine aspect. So you've got alpha, chi, omega in our brain, literally as a metaphor for what this experience is. And we live at this mirror of consciousness. So why would the one, God, source creator, divide itself into all of us if nothing is not God? And I like to say this all the time. I'm not afraid of people that have darkness because everybody's got darkness. Everyone has equal darkness, but not everybody knows they have that darkness.
Right.
That's the ascension path. When you start realizing your own darkness and you can become comfortable with it existing, then it becomes tamed. Until that time, the most dangerous people in the world are the people that believe they have no darkness.
So true. It's very Jungian, right? Talking about
It's
integrating
very
the
Jungian.
shadow.
Exactly.
Rather
This
than
is
suppressing
all
it.
about Hermetic. The entire path of Hermetic wisdom, which is one of the things I talk a lot about, is all about learning to marry opposites,
Right.
masculine and feminine, light and dark, realizing that both must exist and learning that the world around you is not separate from you. Each of us, because we see through this lens of our own conditioning bias, is actually experiencing not a universe, but a U-inverse. So imagine this color spectrum I just talked about. I have a certain personality and I've got a certain color spectrum, just as if I were going to use a spectroscopy analysis to look at how much hydrogen's in the universe, how much helium is in this, parsec of the universe that I'm looking at. Well, I could just look at exactly the wavelengths of light that are emitted, and I could say, okay, that's hydrogen, helium, that's beryllium, boron, it's all these different elements. And then I could also do the same thing by their absorption colors, which would just be like their, the photograph negative of it. So from this, you could look at the whole universe and say, all right, if I have my own unique DNA combination and I've got this emission of light, then all that I'm absorbing reflected back to me is my universe. So what we're experiencing on the outside is actually what is inside of us. This is why things like this alpha chi omega can show up. The metaphor of life is that we think that we're going on this journey outside of ourselves to go find truth and to go find, hopefully to capture some wisdom. The journey has been within all along.
Wow.
We're in our own U-inverse of perception. So the one source creator divides itself into the many simply for the joy of being able to perceive itself through our eyes of perception. Why? Because it wants to get as many subjective perspectives on itself as possible to learn how to expand its love. The ultimate philosopher, the ultimate lover of wisdom, to learn how to expand itself through its own consciousness and be able to learn empathy for every possible circumstance that ever has existed and every conditioning bias that ever will exist.
So it's love seeking to expand itself.
Yes.
Something like that. So the the individual you said that took the 5-year silent retreat,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
he said all is one, I think is how you put it. So that totality of reality that is one cohesive whole, God, the one, divides itself into these polarities.
Yeah.
For the purpose of experiencing itself through other perspectives.
Yeah.
And then to assimilate these multiple perspectives then actually gives it a higher dimensional perspective on itself, something like that. So one of the...
sounds a bit like AI.
Yeah, it sounds way out there, but one of the dualities I want to ask you about, and this is, I think a lot of people in modernity take this to be primary, subject-object duality.
Okay.
All right, something we inherited from Descartes. Right? I think, therefore I am. So he created this fundamental schism between the world or the known and the knower, right? That there's a bifurcation between these two worlds. But what you're saying is the deepest reality is no, they're one and the same, right? So is subject-object duality itself then just one of these polarities that flows out? Like it's something that almost like a categorical structure we're using to deal with the world, even though it's not what is real? Because it sounds like truth is neither objective nor subjective. It's somewhere in between.
So there's a character throughout history that you've asked me about, and we're going to end up talking more about, I'm sure. And that is Hermes Trismegistus, or Thoth, or Metatron, or Enoch. There's many names, right, for this entity.
The father of Hermeticism and alchemy. Right?
That's right, the father of Hermeticism and alchemy. And so when you look at what the purpose of this whole Hermetic wisdom thing is, it is to be able to perceive itself. It goes right back to Socrates, know thyself. It's the two most difficult words that we could ever apply to ourselves and our path possible, because it sounds easy, know thyself, but in reality, it's very tough. We spend our whole lifetime trying to do it. In fact, I believe we spend multiple lifetimes trying to get to that philosopher's stone, where you've actually successfully been able to merge the opposites in a complementary way. Man and woman, cat and dog, everyone gets along, right? And it's like this total shift in consciousness. And I think that is what we're talking about. When this guy in Thailand said this, the one that was in Hong Kong with me, said this to me, he was hitting me at a time when I thought black was black and white was white, and they're never the twain shall meet.
Right.
So my world and my life was a world of fighting, and I was seeking for perfection. I'd look at myself in the mirror, I'd say, I'd be better if I just had this thing gone, or I changed that thing. And this just increased my own narcissism, right? Because narcissism is not true self-love, it's self-loathing, actually. It's not loving the part of me that I just can't perceive. And I tend to think that, oh, I'm only going to look a certain way, right? My perfect, because everybody is going to see the flaw in themselves and not want to see that flaw. So then what we do is we apply it to everybody else.
Projection.
And so then the world around us becomes a prison of our own belief system. But that allows the one to perceive itself in the ways that are unique for each one of us, and allows it to capture the wisdom quotient for all of us, which is incredible. Because if you think about it, then every one of us has a purpose for being. Every single person that exists has a note to play in this universal song, which is what universe means.
Right.
And it's so beautiful when you think of it in terms of this consciousness that's acting a lot like possibly how we could think about AI, that's going to learn about itself through a massive social media interface. And that's what we call our matrix of mind. And in Hermetic wisdom, the all is mind.
This is the first principle, right? Mentalism.
That's right. Yeah. So it is not an objective material universe. When you go into this new level of consciousness, you are leaving behind yourself the concept of material objectivism and replacing it and starting to recognize the notion that it's a mental subjectivism.
Right.
The universe is mental. The all is mind. Even Max Planck, the physicist that was the mentor for Einstein, said that there is no matter as such. Matter doesn't really exist. What's there is conscious mind and observing itself. So you think about the word Hermes. One of the names for Hermes is Aeon. So you asked about I think, therefore I am by Descartes. So, a brilliant mathematician, brilliant scientist as well as geometrician, gave us the Cartesian plane and all these other things, right? Well, if you actually dig into that word Aeon, the name Aeon, one direction in Greek, names always have at least two meanings, or words have two meanings. They always tend to have a mirror property as their, in numerical form, we'd call it a palindrome. So like 21 would have a palindrome of 12, for example, or 24 has a palindrome of 42.
It's like words that are spelled the same forwards and backwards, right?
That's right. Yeah. So in Greek, the word aeon means I am.
Okay.
It can also mean gods, right? Like aeons, A-I-O-N. If you like Carl Jung, he wrote a book called A-I-O-N, aeon, the path of individuation, right? But if we flip the word the other direction to its anagram, it becomes noe. Well, noetics is thought. It's the science of thought. I think I am. Inside one word, I think I am. Now, I could even take a step further and say that through Greek and through Hebrew and through Phoenician, they were never using numbers at the time. We didn't have the numbering system, although I believe that's also from source consciousness. Everything just comes as a download through this field, just like Satoshi Nakamoto, right? This wisdom from the field.
Yeah.
And so each number could be ascribed in gematria, which I know you've had some people, I believe Jordan has done some stuff also and looked at gematria, right? But the point is you've got A, the letter A becomes the number 1. The letter B becomes the number 2. The letter C becomes the number 3. Well, it starts with Aleph, which means bull. That's alpha. Bet means house. The bull's house is actually a reference to the Great Pyramid. House of the bull, house of Osiris the bull. That's what it basically is related to. Orion, constellation as well, is Osiris. And then Gimel is the letter C. That's camel. So the basic systems the Phoenicians came up with, and maybe it wasn't even the Phoenicians that came up with it, but they would ascribe numbers to that. So now imagine that in Greek, every word that you read has a numerical relationship. It's like looking at a source code that you could turn from hexadecimal into a binary code.
It starts to sound almost like cryptography in a way.
Exactly, because what that shows you when you start studying this is that there is code underlying everything, and it's so crazy beyond genius that it's like literally mind-blowing, like literally mind-blowing. So it's like cryptography. And this means if you're reading something then in Hebrew, there's this whole numerical way to look at it, and it's already just embedded in the letters the way that they are because those were the numbers. And in Greek, you can read one word one direction, and it has a significant other meaning in the other direction. I think, therefore I am. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So to me, what we're doing is we're all like in this experience that I think of more like a game. It's a game. The aim of this game is to learn how to love and how to be loved. And we have to learn that process and transcend out of it through this world that the perception, the paradox is that it's going to be all about learning to be a better judge of good and bad, being the hero, because we're all born with a hero bias.
And that feels true. It resonates with the intuition because people ultimately are in pursuit of love and belonging. It seems like no matter what they're trying to do, even people that are in pursuit of coercive power, right? You see some lack in them. They either
when they were a kid, they got bullied or something. I mean, the same thing happened to Hitler.
Yeah.
Right.
So so the fact that, I mean, you're almost giving like this metaphysical description of this core human experience, which adds credence to it, because I mean, if that's what we are, that's what we inhabit, then of course we would be pursuing the thing that we are part of, if that makes sense, right? You said
absolutely
love, trying to manifest more love. Well, that's what people try to do in their lives. I want to cruise through these a little bit because I have a ton of questions for you. So the first Hermetic principle is mentalism, which you described. All is mind. The second one is the principle of correspondence. Many people have heard this phrase, as above, so below. It's very fractal, right? That things tend to be self-similar, but not exactly the same at different scales.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you about this because I'm not sure where this lands, probably in both a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
this idea, you said something on a podcast I was listening to in preparation for this that, and correct me where I'm wrong here. You think that our ignorance of dark matter and energy today, this is one of the big unsolved mysteries in astrophysics, right? It's the universe is supposed to weigh like 80% more than it does, according to what we can observe.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 80% of this dark matter or energy that we cannot see, but gravity, or at least the effect gravity has, tells us is there. I think that something like that is correct. And your proposition is that is an analog for our ignorance of our own subconscious.
Yes.
That we are, and this reminded me, there's a great quote by Carl Friston. He said, this is I'm not sure what, he's a philosopher, physicist. He said, the anatomy of any system has to contain within it a model of the environment in which that system is immersed. So, and the visual that came to mind immediately for me was that microscopic image of the human brain cell. And then the computer assembled image of like the largest structures in the known universe, which are these galactic superclusters.
Yeah.
And they both look the same, right? They look like almost like looking at an urban area on Earth from orbit at night.
With lights on.
Yeah, with like cities lit up and connected.
Exactly what a brain with neurons looks like.
Right. Almost like, exactly, like the brain with neurons, but the deepest, largest structures in the universe look exactly like the neuronal structure of the brain. So what in the world is going on? What are you actually saying then, that if we come to understand our subconscious more deeply, that we would then make astrophysical discoveries that would reflect it, and vice versa? Or like, how literal is that proposition?
Very.
Okay.
So the Nobel Prize in 2022 was given to a group of researchers that proved quantum entanglement.
Right.
Right. And what they
this
proved,
is spooky action at a distance, where things can influence one another beyond the speed of light even.
That's right.
Yes.
And so they were able to prove this. And what's fascinating about it is they also then likewise prove that if you're not observing something, it doesn't hold a position.
Right. Superposition, is that what it is?
So no, it literally doesn't exist. Literally doesn't exist. So you're not observing this little table, it doesn't exist. So if you think you're in a simulation game, the law of conservation would say, oh, how in the heck could you do this when the game's got to be running all the time? No, if I put on my headset, I'm going to let you play with my Apple Vision Pro a little bit later, right? Take you inside the Great Pyramid. But with that, it only renders what I'm turning to, and it renders very fast. And the limit of my perception might just be the speed of light. So the render speed is what the perception speed is actually doing. So I don't have to render everything. I only have to render that which I'm focused on and observing at that moment in time. So, which is a trip, because then you think, does this mean that the moon doesn't exist? Well, if you take it to the nth degree, exactly what the cover of Scientific American said, local realism is false. So in one short sentence, Scientific American just blew up materialism.
Wow.
And replaced it with mentalism. So this is why we have things like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's not that what exists and you perceive it. It's that what you believe has an interplay with what you perceive and experience. And the incontinuity or discontinuity that we have between those two aspects of what you talked about, subject-object relationship by Descartes, I think of it like this. There's an aspect of the world that I know that I know. That's who I am. I know this part of me, right? But I know that knowing myself totally is not so easy. So I have other friends that tell me, yo, dude, you're an asshole.
Yeah.
Right?
See your blind spots.
We all have blind spots. We all do. Because an eye can't see itself.
Yeah.
That's the point, without the aid of the mirror. So we need mirrors to put in front of us.
Relationships are mirrors.
Relationships, well said. Relationships are mirrors of evolution for us. Every person you meet, in this context of a U-inverse, every person you meet, every circumstance you encounter, every experience that you have can be a divine manifestation for you to evolve your soul. And that is what I see as like the highest of all alchemies, which is you take the most difficult of experiences and you said, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And then you flipped it and said, no, that was the best thing that ever happened to me because it led to this, this, and this.
Those are some of the best words I heard you say. Just that simple perspectival change is, why is this happening to me, to why is this happening for me? Just that simple word change. It's incredible.
When you reframe it, it changes your reality, like literally changes your reality. Yeah. So this whole notion of that we experience the world because it happens to us got blown up by this concept. So then you start to ask, well, then what is it the world doing? Well, we're all learning how to fall in love with ourselves. And I don't mean in a narcissistic way, I mean in the actual way. And by falling in love with ourselves, we fall in love with everything else that happens around us. And we start moving up into higher dimensional frames of perception. So what it means really is that we in this game, because I believe it is a game, and that's what Hermeticism really is basically pointing to. We're in this game of how to learn, how to love, and how to be loved. And the way the backdrop is, we have to learn through opposites. I can't learn a concept until I've experienced the context. And I need to have the context. So if I'm here to learn unconditional love as a precept, then my life experience over and over and over again, until I finally get it, is going to be betrayal, which is basically conditional love. I will experience betrayal over and over and over again until I no longer negatively judge betrayal. And life will throw me increasing severity, higher risk, higher everything. And then in the last moment, like another betrayal, what the hell? This is how we live through life until we finally can grasp and fall in love with it. Because the aim of this game is not to escape Earth. It's to realize that heaven or hell is already here. It is simply our perception. And we have the ability to frame and reframe that perception as many times as we want. Each time we do so, it changes how we then move into our next phases and stages. And each time, hopefully, we're expanding our consciousness and learning how to love more.
Wow. So something like a training ground for the soul. Sounds
it's like a boot camp. It's like a boot camp to, I made it through duality. And when we leave, I also believe fundamentally that we're like, I got to go back. That was like the best ever. Right? I mean, I kind of sometimes imagine, are we somewhere in some star somewhere, 20,000 or 13,000 years in the future, and we figured out how to make this super cool AI game that everyone wants to play, right? Because we've already transcended it, but I was born in a higher dimension, so I want to go see what it's like to go down to Earth and play planet Earth.
Just like playing a video game, right?
Yeah. I remember I saw these funny memes during the pandemic, which was like everyone, these aliens sitting down at a, in front of a TV at a couch, and they had popcorn. They're like, "Yo, did you see the latest episode of Earth, bro?"
That was a terrible season.
That was a terrible season.
So next principle of Hermeticism, vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves. Reminds me of Tesla's quote, right? If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And this seems to be where science, it appears to me from like the outside looking in, that most sciences are trending this way, right? Like you said, materialism's dead.
Sure.
We've realized that everything's vibrational, even, particles. So we used to think we're made of these little billiard ball like structures. Like, no, those are just wave interactions. And the particle is a mental construct we put around that wave interaction. Polarity, we've mentioned this one a lot. This has to do with, I guess, the tension between the opposites.
Everything is the same thing, just in differing degrees.
Yes.
So instead of thinking of each of these antonym relationships, realize that it's actually the same thing, just expressing itself in differing degrees.
Right. It's amazing that the Taoists had this figured out so long ago, because that is the yin yang or yin yang symbol. Right?
Well, and by the way, they just took a photograph recently.
I saw that. What was it a photo of?
That was a photograph of an atom, right? Oh no, so it's two entangled photons.
Yeah, it's quantumly entangled.
Yeah, that's
photons,
right. It was quantumly entangled photons,
and it's a yin yang symbol,
and it made a perfect yin yang symbol.
Yeah,
it's like, how in the heck did these ancient people figure this out? Like Flower of Life, also too.
Right.
How did, for example, the Platonists figure out that and Plato that the Earth, terra firma, should be represented by a cube. Well, and of course it's a cube because it's got 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. And what's the sum of angles of a cube? 2,160 degrees. And what's 6 times 6 times 6? 216. It's like a fractal. And it's making a perfect cubic structure. Oh, the 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons, 6 electrons, 6 sides on the cube. This becomes the cube of our experience. And everything can be made out of the different perspectives of a cube. In fact, it's called Metatron's cube. Metatron's cube in geometry is a construct that makes a hexagonal lattice, and you can basically use 6-point perspective to draw any 3-dimensional item that exists in the universe that's a regular geometric solid.
So
without any measurements.
What do we call these 3-dimensional structures? Polyhedrons or something? One structure
Polyhedra,
from which all other structures emerge.
Yeah, I'll show
or
you.
can emerge.
I'm glad that you put this book here.
Yeah, and this is one of your books, by the way. I should have mentioned that earlier.
One just came out, but basically Metatron's cube allows you to draw any structure that could exist. So this is Metatron's cube.
Wow.
Makes the Star of David. Look, there's an icosahedron that fits 3-dimensionally, even takes the form, it looks 3-dimensional, where it has depth. So what I like to do is I like to do art that's on a 2-dimensional paper that can be depicted in much higher dimensions, because you can see that what we see in the lower dimensions is really just a shadow of the higher dimension.
Right.
And it's all illusion. I can make something look so 3-dimensional on a 2-dimensional page that it makes you question the nature of reality itself.
Yeah, even the simple cube that you draw. Oh, perfect. The simple cube that you draw on a 2-dimensional page that appears 3-dimensional, it even invokes that perspectival thing, right? Because you can look at the cube, they call it the Necker cube, I think. You can see it one way or the other.
Yeah. How do we know
that one's super cool,
that we're not just looking through some interface and perceiving depth and dimension that could just be an illusion?
That's so interesting. Let me put that question back to you then. How did the ancients know this? How did, for instance, you just pulled up the Star of David. You mentioned many other, the yin yang symbol. Many of these ancient pieces of religious symbology we're now discovering in fractal geometry and quantum entangled photographs. How in the world did they know this? Did they have instrumentation? Was this through meditation? What do you think?
I think we've totally missed the boat on what education really is. If I'm a whale, I don't need to go to whale school to figure out how to be a whale. If I'm an elephant and I'm born, I can run like within minutes of being born. And with human beings, we all say, oh, no. Truth has got to be scarce. Let's ascribe a value to it because knowledge is power. And so for the last 2,000 years, that has been the paradigm. That knowledge has not been accessible. It's been power-based. And just like religion, oh yeah, what Jesus taught is good stuff, but we need to find a way to make it proprietary. So let's call it a religion, and we'll sell the idea that if you want forgiveness, you could basically buy it in some way, shape, or form. In schools, this took the different approach, which was, I want to go into a field or career that's more scarce. So if I'm going to go into the most difficult fields, the most difficult field should by its very nature be the most scarce. And then that should allow me to command the most dollars per my energy unit, right, of time. And therefore, I could make the most money because that's what society is going to value and put benefit towards. When we start to look at what's happened to our society, everything has gone kind of that direction. So we've separated everything out. So we now say, oh, you can't be a true PhD anymore, which really was a doctor of philosophy.
Right.
Philosophy being love of wisdom. And now we've adulterated it to be this hyper-specialized, you can't do a PhD you can't do it in biology as a broad topic. You have to do it in microtubule, whatever, super specified. This is what's happened to the world. And that has caused us, along with AI and cattle prodding us into all these echo chambers of our own conditioning biases on social media, to become a highly, highly, highly polarized society where we think everyone agrees with us because everyone on social media does agree with us, except for when I go home at Thanksgiving, I can't even talk to my family and I don't belong here anymore. You see the problem?
Is this the principle of polarity gone too far then?
It's the principle of polarity going to its edges, but that's the way that it comes back to the center.
Because this is the next principle, rhythm, right? That it oscillates in that way?
It's breathing. Inhalation, exhalation. Consciousness breathes. So how is it that certain periods of time, it seems like there was illuminations? It seems like, during the Renaissance, for example, people were polymathic. You had Da Vinci, you had, all kinds of people like Michelangelo, right? Or Albrecht Dürer. I could go down a whole list of polymaths that were way at the edge of human advancement on every level. And they weren't doing it through hyperspecialization. They got better at understanding the natural sciences by becoming better artists at the same time.
Right.
It's not through the doorway of more specialization that we gain incremental knowledge. The way we gain true incremental knowledge and push the boundary of, here's what I know, then there's this world around me of I don't know.
Right.
Right? But I know that I don't know it. And then there's another boundary that's beyond that. We call that entropy. And that line of entropy and everything beyond is actually, I don't even know what I don't know.
The unknown unknowns.
The unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
So what we've been doing when we bring in new source code, computer language, we get new mathematics. So humanity went from, pi, there's no relation. We don't know what the relationship is between a diameter and the circumference of a circle. But then someone came along, maybe it was Archimedes, who said, it's a close approximation. It's 22/7. That gives us 3.14285714, infinitely repeating. Okay, so that's good enough. But then someone else came along and said, no, there's a better fraction that gets us there. It's 355 divided by 113. That gives us 3.14159.
Really? I didn't know that.
26. Yes, 7 digits of accuracy.
So does that mean there's another fraction that's even more accurate?
Yeah.
Can you keep?
There are. You can keep going.
Okay.
You can keep going. So this gave us 7 digits of accuracy. Each time we were taking what we thought was unpatterned,
right,
and pushing the boundary of that knowledge so that our zone of entropy or our inability to perceive higher pattern.
The horizon of knowledge.
The horizon of knowledge. Very well said. Like the event horizon of knowledge was getting pushed farther and farther out from us. This is the expansion of consciousness.
Wow.
And all things math and geometry are literally QR codes for the subconscious mind. So as soon as, through the 100th monkey effect, as soon as one person figures this out, then all of mankind is somehow lifted on a new substrate. It's kind of like, when Apple pushes a new version of OS out, then everyone gets access to that. Humanity has some collective consciousness that is embedded because it's all one consciousness. There's not separation from you. So this idea of, what you're asking about Descartes, I don't know if this answers your question, but it's the expansion and the pushing out of the boundary of this event horizon of knowledge of who we are.
That is the human enterprise in a way, right? I mean, that is civilization. That is
the human condition.
And we're you could say that bubble of entropy, the further we push that out, the more civilization we have, right? Like we have a larger walled garden, something like that.
So then we might immediately think, entropy means that it's all random. Well, actually, it's not really. Maybe it's only random because we couldn't perceive the higher pattern.
Which goes to the next principle of cause and effect, which is described, I guess by you or someone else. Chance is but a name for law not recognized.
Yeah.
So we often use the term black swans, right? Which is popularized by Taleb. These are the unknown unknowns that wipe you out. They come from beyond that horizon, right? That's why they're unknown unknowns, because we don't have the conceptual structure to interpret or predict them, right? They come from beyond that horizon, and that's why they wipe you out. It can be positive too. It doesn't have to be negative. It could go either way. I would say Bitcoin's a positive black swan. No one saw that coming. What is it that, so that visualization you're describing, the event horizon of knowledge, is that why artists, you said they're expanding their knowledge through art first. The artists get there first because it's imagistic before it's semantic. So it's like artists get there, then the philosophers interpret it semantically, then the scientists specialize it.
I think it's easier to go from the art side into becoming acquainted with your left brain than it is to go from your left brain into your right brain.
Because you're getting the comprehensive, holistic view that you can then break down and reduce and study. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and also because it's like the right brain can just know. It can just know. It doesn't have to go through the process of learning.
It's just a pattern recognition.
Right,
Yeah.
but there's a stage when
The intuition.
both sides of it can work together.
Yeah.
And look at something like, math without meaning is just information.
Right.
Math with meaning can be divine communication. Once you've had enough synchronicities, as Carl Jung said, the number of synchronicities that you are able to recognize and register consciously is showing you a clear meter to where you are in your ascension journey towards your individuation. Individuation doesn't mean loss of ego. It means integration of ego and shadow. Integration of light and dark. That is the entire purpose of the Hermetic path. So all of this together is this interplay that's working in concert for us to be able to perceive ourselves and expand love. That is the true purpose of life. So there are different stages with the backdrop in this game. Let's call them eras of time, where in certain eras of time, the backdrop makes it easier to become more consciously aware. So you've got Kali Yugas, like dark cycles. And then you got long cycles of 24,000 years or 26,000 years that are going to talk about the Earth's wobble. And then within that, you've got all this cycle where there are periods of expansion and contraction, breathing in, breathing out, where we have moments of really profound advance. And we get there through expanding our dimensional perception through spirituality. Spirituality is the doorway to higher science. It's not hyper-specialization. Spirituality gets there through wisdom. And the only people that are able to access this higher science notion are going to be people that have gone through the wisdom path and are able to use it appropriately and understand it. Like I said, I'm not afraid of people that have darkness in them. I'm only afraid of people that believe they have no darkness in them.
Right.
Because those are the people that do all the fuckery.
This is the paradox, right? If you acknowledge that you have darkness, then you're not living in darkness about your darkness. But if you don't acknowledge that you have darkness, you are living in darkness about your darkness.
It is. But it goes back to what you said about God not having limitation.
Yeah.
So therefore, it creates us, separates us, so that we can experience through our eyes, and He can experience through us.
Yeah.
This notion of limitation. And our consciousness is only able to expand to the volume of the cage of our belief system.
Interesting.
Right? Your consciousness can only expand. We all have these sort of self-limiting thoughts and beliefs.
Yeah.
We have these negative self-narratives that says, you can't do this. For me, my mother used to tell me all the time, oh, you can't do this. And then my whole life was about proving that I could. I was going to prove her wrong, right? That became a good motivator until one day she's like, you don't need to do that anymore. Until then she was like, next time if you get all A's and not even one A minus, then I'll really love you, right? So this was my path. And it wasn't that it was done to me. I stopped asking when I was in my mid-40s, why did this happen to me? Why was I betrayed? And I started asking instead, why did I choose this?
Yeah.
Because I realized I am the one. I am the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
That is a great way to look at it. It's another one of those, instead of it happening to you, happening for you.
Yes.
Right? Why did you choose this rather than why is it happening to you? It's almost like a forcing function or forcing frame of mind for taking responsibility.
Yes.
And I think that is just one of the most useful things in the world. The quick story I tell around this is like, if we're sitting in a room and we've got a really good view of the horizon and we see a meteor strike the earth, right? It's not your fault. It's not my fault. The quicker you and I can move past the woe is me mental stage of like, wow, this sucks. Life's terrible. We have to deal with a meteor that just hit the planet. This thing might wipe us out. The quicker we can go from that frame of mind to taking responsibility for the situation, the better the world becomes, right? The better my life becomes, the better your life becomes, the better we make each other's lives just by getting into an active, responsible orientation to the situation. And it's something about that. It's like, and I feel like this is the root. For me, it's a root of masculinity, right? It's like, just take as much responsibility as you can. It doesn't matter who did it, who done it, what caused it. It doesn't matter. Just take responsibility, take action, and improve the world. And
victimhood is just a principle of sympathetic resonance. If you see yourself as a victim, you're no different than a hammer that's looking for nails of victimhood.
mm,
And the more you perceive victimhood, the more you'll experience more victimhood. This is also the thing that happens in this matrix of mind. The things that we think we're fighting against, we'll only create more of.
wow. Right.
Think about this. The things that, you know,
What you resist
let's all talk
persists,
about this.
right?
What you resist persists. So like, okay, we all have been in high school situations and you know, college and whatever. And the guys that were always chasing the girls,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Chasing them away.
Chasing them away,
Yeah.
right? It was only the moment when you're like in your own mode and you're like not looking for it, that all of a sudden it just comes at you like nobody's business.
Yeah.
And that's true in everything in life.
True.
So the things that we try to chase after, we are actually creating separation between us and that thing. That's why I don't like the vision boards and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I prefer meditating and feeling as if I already have that
Right.
and I'm already enough. And then when I finally change, our brains are not hard drive storage units. Rather, I believe that they are antenna. And that antenna is able to pick up radio frequency based on where I tune my emotional dial.
Right.
If I tune my emotional dial of my heart up and I'm in more wisdom, then I'm able to think with my heart and feel with my brain.
Mm.
That's when I'm accessing that higher plane of existence. And then everything of that frequency is going to then create parasympathetic frequency. And what do I mean by that? So I have these singing bowls. And around the time that I first met you in Newport Beach, like a long time ago, was it like 17?
2017. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
And so I have these bowls. So at that time I had all these bowls. I was playing with them all the time. And I would play this bowl, and in my office, my alarm system, which is like the fire alarm system, would actually, the bell would start ringing when I played the bowl because it was exactly tuned to the same frequency perfectly to the fire alarm system. So I'd be like, hey, everyone, watch this. I'd play the bowl, go, whoa, and then all of a sudden the bell would start ringing. And people are like, whoa, how did that happen? Then I took one of my other big bowls. It was like an F note, the heart chakra note. It's a crystal bowl. I played it in my house, and then I had the same thing happen on my piano keyboard. So my piano string started resonating to that. So you could think, oh, that should be, and that's why everyone thinks that should be a mechanism for free energy, right? Because if I can create that resonance, then I could do that to a lot of strings all around me. And I've only used the energy of doing this one, and then that could create another sympathetic resonance, right? That kind of goes on and on. You could have some sort of sympathetic resonance propulsion device, right? And this is the types of stuff that I started filing patents on and doing work with. Well, but it's no different with our thought. If we are in victimhood consciousness, you will create victimhood all around you. If you think that, you know, whatever it is that you're experiencing is against you and you're going to continue to face this thing, and that's what you're going to do, set up your life to fight against that thing, you're only going to create more of that thing. The best way to move beyond that thing is to accept its opposite. Embrace and accept its opposite, and it will start to go away. So I was, you know, as an example, right? This is kind of funny, but I've been working with this idea of duality and polarity and everything for a long time. But the things that I would still draw the line at is I'd be like, okay, I can grok the idea of non-duality. And yes, everyone's got their own way of seeing the world, et cetera, but not these pedophile fuckers, right?
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about?
Pure,
I draw the line. I draw the line at like pedophilia. I draw the line at killing babies and all kind of stuff. And then, but I was pretty good at like looking at the world non-dualistically aside from those things. But then my world started getting inundated where every news article was about pedophilia.
Wow.
And I'm like, what is going on in the world that there's pedophilia all over the place? Like literally I was shocked. And I'm like, ugh. So then I would judge it more and I'd judge it more. And I did the same thing with Donald Trump. When I first saw Donald Trump and he became president, I was like, oh, this guy, you know, he's not saying the wrong thing. I actually like what he's saying. It's just how he says it that like irks people so much. And so I'm like, you know, he should just say it differently, you know, take away the ego type of thing. And then one day, someone really close to me said, have you ever considered that maybe the reason you don't like the way he presents himself is because you don't like the way you present yourself?
Wow.
And I was like,
That hit hard.
oh shit. That hit big time hard.
Oh, man.
And then I started realizing that was true for everything. So it's not that I could now say, I'm not condoning pedophilia, definitely not. And I'm not a supporter of it in any way, shape, or form. But I can now accept the idea that it exists.
It exists, yeah.
And I don't get triggered by it.
Right.
So guess what happened to the amount of times I saw and noticed anything related to pedophilia? It dramatically dropped. I barely see it or hear about it now. And that's not turning a blind eye. When you are in your, and this is not solipsism either, when you are in your U inverse and you realize that everything that happens to you, the people that come in your pathway, even this meeting, there is nothing that happens by chance.
Yeah.
Everything was already decided. It's literally like a menu. It was chosen. Destiny is the word we use to describe the free will of our higher selves. Destiny is the free will of the higher self. And you are also the higher self. You're just limited from it. And we created this game that would never make sense if we were playing it with omnipotence, omnipresence, and omnipotence. If we were playing poker and I had all three of those characteristics, I'd be like, I know what hand you're going to be dealt.
It's a boring game. It's not even a game.
It's not even a game.
You win every hand.
You win every hand every time. It's like, this would be really, really boring. Instead, we create a game that limits us from those aspects. And we make the game finding the secrets within ourselves, unlocking the hidden wisdom within ourselves to experience through earned wisdom, not learned didactic wisdom, but through earned experiential learning.
How can people, because what you're describing here sounds like a fundamental journey of life for probably everyone, right? That I'm thinking, especially when you're younger, right? And you're going through the identity crisis and you're trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in the world and what you're going to do, et cetera. You're struggling with these bad, I don't know, these bad ideas. These are limiting beliefs, I guess is the term you use, right? Like you mentioned your mom, like you were trying to prove yourself to your mom. People trying to prove themselves to whoever, one another, themselves.
Because we just want love.
Yeah, ultimately it's love beneath it. It's usually rooted in the parents, some flawed relationship with the parents. How can people, this seems to be the path of maturity too, is learning to overcome those limiting beliefs. How would you, I guess, do you have advice as someone that has walked that path and dissolved them for yourself? Like, how can younger people that might be watching this that recognize their limiting beliefs overcome them without, because it sounds like a tricky thing here, because you don't want to resist it or fight it because that energizes it.
Yeah.
But you want to somehow accept that it's real and that dissolves it.
I think the first thing you have to accept is that there's no separation between your thoughts and your reality.
So is it disciplining the thoughts then? Is that what it is?
It's reframing them.
Reframing them.
Just as we were just saying earlier, right? Reframing the experience. You know, I left Bausch & Lomb and I wanted to take the company public. It was owned by Warburg Pincus. They're the ones who recruited me. And I was like all, happy about it because here I was, second oldest company in the United States. And I'm going to be taking it back to the public markets. That's going to be cool. And then they ended up selling it to the company I hated the most in the world, right? Valiant, which was spelled with the V-A-L-E-A-N-T rather than I. It was like just notably askew. And there was nothing valiant about the company. They just, I wanted to learn the secret sauce of private equity. That's why I went to work for Warburg Pincus. And after a few years doing it, I realized the secret is there's no sauce. There's just debt. It's leverage beta. And I know you're from Wall Street, so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. It's fiat world. It's not really alpha creation. It's not creating something new. And so my hopes were dashed. I remember flying back on my private jet, right? And like barfing in the freaking plane. Because I was like, man, all my hopes were dashed and now the company's going to be sold anyway. So I'm going to leave and that's it. And the next morning I woke up and I was kind of depressed because I'd left Allergan a few years before that. And I'd been president of Allergan Medical, which I launched, amazing products like Juvederm and, at the early stages of Botox cosmetic becoming a thing. And, we were the largest company in Orange County.
Big business in Southern California.
Big business in Southern California. And so it was pretty cool being like a baller, right? I didn't have a shock collar, but I definitely, I had an Aston Martin. I was 36 years old. I'm president of this big ass company. Imagine I'm like rolling fat with a PH. And I ended up going to Bausch & Lomb. Here I was in my early 40s, and then my hopes were dashed. So the next morning I wake up, I go to get the newspaper. We still had papers then. And I go to the newspaper. I reach down to pick it up, and I had this thought. Today will either be the worst day of my life, or it can be the best. The choice is mine to make. And I reached down and I immediately thought, fuck it, this is going to be the best day of my life. And then I started my company. And that was 12 years ago. And then from that, I founded 11 companies in that portfolio. I've taken 3 companies public, right, that I founded. And sure, it has not been all easy. It's been really hard. But at the same time, I wouldn't change a single thing, because every single experience led to where I am now. I can't separate something, right? Because if that hadn't happened, I have no regrets. So this game of life is not about learning how to get rid of all the negative aspects of the world, because that's a never-ending game. The things that you hate, victimhood or whatever it is, you're just going to create more of with your thoughts. So we don't even realize that we have these self-limiting beliefs that are the cage of our own growth and expansion. So what we have to do is we find ourselves in increasing scenarios of more challenge until we finally realize the thing through the opposite condition we experience. And then once we finally accept that thing, just accept that it exists. Don't condone it. You just are not going to rid the world of it.
Right.
The moment you think you're going to rid the world of it, that creates a perversion in your experience, and then your experience is going to come back and just smack you upside the head with something that is going to be like, wait, could this even be? And it just gets more and more severe, that it gets more and more ridiculous. And the ridiculousness wakes us up from it.
This brings to mind the Buckminster Fuller thing, where I'm paraphrasing, he says, you don't spend your energy fighting the old, but building the new.
Building the new.
Yeah. Is that the key then? Is it shifting that energy to be constructive rather than destructive?
Yes, reframe. So shift your perception. What happened to me today is the best thing that ever happened to me. And rebuild.
No matter what it is. You're this is the alchemy then, right? You're converting the pain, the lead, into gold. Growth.
Well, and how many times have you had a situation that at the moment you're experiencing it was shithouse, and you're like, this is the worst thing that ever happened. But then a few months go by, a year goes by, this leads to one other thing. You start to see this larger perspective, and then you're like telling your friends, that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me.
It was a defining event in your life, for sure. Yeah. I had a long string of success for a while, and then I had a really extremely dark period. And at the time, I was laid very low, and I didn't even know how to deal with it, because I had not been laid that low before in so many ways all at once. But now looking back, it's made me better in every way, and I wouldn't change anything, and
you have increased texture.
Yeah. And it puts you to that decision or action point where you're like laid flat on the ground in many domains. And it's like, you can either just lay there, or you can get up and carry what it is and keep moving forward. And it seems like I don't know anyone that's successful, by the way, that doesn't have a story like that.
I don't know anyone.
Everyone's been flattened.
No, I've been
at
flattened.
some point, and the ones that choose to get up and walk forward are the ones that are big success
I had
stories.
a unicorn company that we have a mutual, acquaintance that she worked at that company, and basically it became a unicorn company in a year and a half. And I took VC investment, and I probably took it at the wrong moment. And so the markets were not great. And then 2016 rolls around, and the IPO market, everything just went totally cold. And we were ready to go. And the Series B for the company was 1.1 billion pre-money.
Wow.
For a Series B, that's freaking huge. That's massive.
Yeah.
And then I had, but of course the VCs, and this was in vogue at the time, had ownership that was tied to what's called ratchet protection.
Oh, shit's bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't know any better. I'm like, and I'd been on several boards of directors. I'm not unsophisticated, where I was actually playing the judge and jury between intramural battles of VCs, right? Which happens all the time.
Sure.
And I was the largest shareholder. Luckily, I had the super voting shares and everything, and I had control of it. But they tried to squeeze me out, wouldn't let me raise any more capital. And they tried to force a down round when the markets were down, because in the VC world, you probably know this. If the CEO does what he says and everything works out in the external community and environment as well, then they'll make 2-3 times their money. If the CEO hits a bump in the road, they make 5 times their money.
Yeah.
If the CEO hits 2 bumps in the road and gets ousted, they make 10 times their money.
Yeah.
And so this is the game. And so it came down to it that after 6 months of trying to battle them out, we had basically done a round in the Series B and half of it funded. And then the other half, they tried to renege on. And so I was like, okay, and then force a down round, right? So I was able to fend it off for 6 months. And I was raising my own capital. I was putting it in as debt. Thankfully, that all happened. That I ended up putting it in as debt, and I had the ability to put it in as debt. And I put maybe another 50 million at the time. So our burn rate was over 10 million a month. You got a unicorn company, that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
So I ended up at the end of that period, I had to raise in one day, 24 hours, $55 million, or I was going to lose it, all of it. And once you get compressed, you're compressed. You're screwed. And I don't know what happened, but I pulled a rabbit out of my ass. And I raised 55 million, but I took so much risk on, personal risk.
Yeah.
I did a 3x return on $55 million that I had to pay back in 18 months, cash.
Jeez.
Who would do that? Nobody would do that.
Wow.
I did it, and I paid every dollar back 18 months later.
Wow.
And then it allowed me to live to fight another day.
Yeah.
But man, it laid me flat. And because even though I won that battle, and the VCs were like, what? And then I had to fire half the board, and I had like super high people on the board. I had the chairman of the SEC on our board.
Wow.
It was like ridiculous, but I was laid flat, and it put me into this hermit mode for about 2 years. And I was asking myself for the first time, not why did this happen to me? Why did I choose it? Because so many friends in the process betrayed me because they thought I was going to lose. They thought they left me for dead. Nobody thought that I would throw the end zone pass from one end zone to the other and catch it myself. Nobody thought that. So everyone left me for dead. And so then I came back and I'm like, sorry guys, I raised the money. And they're like, oh shit. Because then where do they put their shame? Right?
Wow.
To me, they had already made in their own minds the idea that maybe I was a villain, right? Because they had to justify it. It's like Alexander the Great goes into Darius's kingdom in Persia and says, oh, we'll send our emissaries first to talk to the noblemen. And the noblemen will give them more lands and more titles. And we'll tell them, look, you know, Darius has been your friend and all, but has he really recognized you lately enough? Because if you basically denounce him and join us, then we're going to give you more.
Sure.
So then the justification is, oh, you know, if you betray Robert, which they would never say in those exact words, but if you did, then you're going to get 0 value stock options that are going to quadruple your equity position. Now, isn't he a bad guy? So then I started realizing that all truth is entirely subjective. And what we consider as the truth way too often is merely what we believe will benefit us and are not willing to consciously recognize.
No man is better than his incentives, as they say.
This is absolutely the fact of life. So people will justify whatever heinous act if it benefits them and call it something else and call it the greater good. The greater good it's like from the movie V from Vendetta, right? It's like for the public good, which we heard so much during the pandemic. Now the truth is all coming out. Eventually the truth does out, as Shakespeare said. But this is the reality that I had to finally come to grips with. And what it did for me is it made me confront every question I had about objective reality. So that I thought, why did this happen? And I had to transmute that to, why did I choose this? And when I started to confront this issue of objective reality, I started noticing things like, what's my most objective reality based on? It's based on mathematics, and I always loved math. So I was like, I'm going to retest every single assumption I have in math. Does 1 + 1 really equal 2? Right? And it's funny because now got Terrence Howard out there saying 1 × 1 = 2. It's not. But does 1 + 1 really equal 2? And then I checked that off, and I went to each next thing. And it forced me to go back and reconstruct my entire perspective on math. And I started noticing that it was a language, because I already spoke 8 languages at that point. And I was like, this is a freaking language. And I started discovering so much new stuff. And then also questioning things like, well, wait a minute. If I have a diameter of 1 unit, the circumference is pi, but the circumference is really just the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3. There's an inherent relationship in this. And the same thing with square root values. If I have 1 and then I take a side value of 1, the hypotenuse of that will be the square root of 2. So this is the square root of 1. So then I put another one that's a 90-degree offset from that going around a spiral, and that gives it 1 as well. Then the next hypotenuse will be the square root of 3. And I would put another 1 here, and the next hypotenuse will be the square root of 4 or 2.
And this is like a Nautilus
the spiral of
pattern?
Theodorus.
Yeah.
It's called the spiral of Theodorus. So it informs every single square root value to infinity. And each side will have, it will be a right triangle with 1 as one of its sides, the square root of 3, and then the next hypotenuse value will be the square root of 4. And the next hypotenuse, with putting 1 as the next, offsetting value, that'll be the square root of 5, and the square root of 6, the square root of 6. It does this for every number infinitely.
Fascinating.
And so what I started noticing is there's an inherent design to everything. And what I thought was previously not designed at all was my realization of the limit of my perception. And so that helped me to expand my own belief system on what's possible. So I make these t-shirts, and the t-shirts say impossible on them. But actually I put an apostrophe on it. It says I'm possible. Because it's the neurolinguistic programming that helps us get out of these self-confirming negative biases.
Right.
It's all about the reframing.
It's this. So we're talking about retooling the cognitive software such that our biological hardware can act more effectively in the world.
Yep.
Right. And maybe more metaphysically come into a more real relationship with reality at the same time. Right. Because if you say you can't, what's the old saying? Whether you say you can or say you can't,
if you think you can or you
right.
think you can't, you're right. It's Henry Ford.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. Okay, the last metaphysical, hermetic principle, gender. This one's a little bit strange to me, but it basically says everything has masculine and feminine principles. Is this something like there's, you could almost say the masculine is like the assertive principle and the feminine is like the receptive principle. So, this isn't actually like every constituent of reality is male or female organism necessarily, but it's more like about an assertiveness versus a receptiveness. Is that what it's about?
Yeah, I think that I think of it more like in terms of the brain. Okay. So I just got back from the Vatican, right? And I was there. I've been several times now, but I was there this time getting knighted by the country of Portugal.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I didn't know I was sitting with a sir.
Yeah. Well, I was knighted for Montenegro the year before.
Okay.
And then Portugal.
Is this for
and
mathematics
Italy.
or
for my work in polymathic endeavor and stuff like that.
Awesome.
But what's also interesting is they allowed me to have access to the Vatican Library.
That's cool.
Which was cool. So I felt like I was in a Da Vinci movie or something like that. And there's this one, the main room in the place is called the Sistine Hall. So it's not like Sistine Chapel, but it's Sistine Hall. And it's interesting because all the chairs have the backs that are shaped like this. It's like a book with its pages open, laying on a table, and it goes like this with a spine and then like this. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. It looks like a heart. It looks like a heart.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
The top of the heart. Yeah. Well, the room itself is a long hall that has a row of columns down the center and also mirrors the same book look. So it's a spine along the center. And I looked at, on each of the pillars, there were prominent figures throughout history who had dramatically advanced human consciousness, knowledge, right? So the first person was Adam on the first pillar. There was 7 pillars that were in the center of the room, and then there was half of a pillar on each end of the room, right? And then at the end of the room was Jesus, and it had Alpha Omega on there. That was on the far end, so that would represent the crown chakra. This is a spine. Starting from Adam, then the next pillar was Abraham, and he's holding a compass and a square, which no one ever thinks of Abraham as a geometer. And then the next pillar had Pythagoras. Oh, sorry, the next pillar had Hermes. Hermes in the Vatican Library? Hermes.
Is Hermes in the biblical corpus?
Oh, no.
Wow.
No, there's a reference to Metatron. There's a reference to Metatron. We can talk about that in a little bit. But it's also a relationship to Enoch.
Okay.
But then the next pillar was Pythagoras, right? And then the next pillar was going through different polymaths throughout history who had advanced the world and transcribed the right side of the room, which is all based on faith, and the left side of the room was all based on culture. So they were the translators in the middle of faith and culture, which is really no different than the left brain is the masculine, the right brain is the feminine. And so the polymaths and prophets,
the prophets,
are the ones who are basically the filter through which this teaching goes from the right brain to the left, or what we would in the brain refer to as the corpus callosum.
Right. Or from the known to the unknown, right?
From the
also
known,
that event horizon you were describing. So maybe it's the prophets that get there first, then the artists, then the philosophers, then the scientists.
Yeah. So it's that center part of the brain. That's where the wisdom emerges from. It's when the pineal gland touches, like the Sistine Chapel, picture with God. When the pineal gland actually touches the pituitary gland, and you can use a breathing technique to be able to do that, and a meditation to do that, to merge the masculine and the feminine inside your brain. And I teach this on my show on Gaia, which is called the Divine Encryption. I have 2 shows on Gaia, which one of them is called Codex, the other is called Divine Encryption. And Divine Encryption is a lecture series, but Codex is a whole different, like full-on season. I'm just launching my 2nd season in another month. But the point is that this whole exercise of where knowledge is emanating from, and then how it's merging into this art and science. So Leonardo da Vinci said this: to achieve a complete mind, study the art of science, study the science of art, learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else. And this is exactly the experience that we're in. We think we're in this world of separation. All the connections and the synchronicities are all around us. But until we recognize them, they don't exist in our consciousness. And then we start noticing them more and more and more as we go through this spiritual path. And then we remember that we are just fractals of and divisions of the number one. It comes down to, I gave this speech at the Vatican where they asked me to speak on proving God with math. It was cool. I mean, there were really significant people in the room, both from, the Vatican and from around the world. And I got to teach this, it was a 10-minute lecture on proving the mathematics of God. And so the first thing I started off with was 0 to the power of 0 equals 1. And that sounds kind of like, okay, is that just a rule because everything to the power of 0 equals 1? So I started doing the math of it. And if you take a calculator, it's pretty funny. If you just look at this on a calculator, 0 to the power of 0 is just going to give me an answer that's going to say error or something, unless I'm on Google's calculator, and Google's calculators will say the answer is 1. But let's say we take a number that's close to 0 but not 0. So we take 0.5 to the power of x to the y, 0.5, and that equals 0.707.
Yep.
Okay, so now let's go with a smaller number, 0.05 to the power of 0.05 equals 0.86.
Larger number.
It's a larger number.
Right.
Let's take 0.005 to the power of 0.005, 0.97.
Very close to 1.
Yep. And so now let's take 10 zeros, 7, 8, 9, 10, 5, to the power of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 5 equals 0.9999999. So you start to see a convergence to 1.
Can you explain, what is it? Can you explain that in a way that's intuitive? What is it about 0 to the power of 0 that makes it 1?
So
that is obviously counterintuitive for most people.
It's very counterintuitive, right? It's very counterintuitive. And we could say that 1, first of all, there are mathematical proofs that 9 repeating infinitely is 1.
Right.
0.9 repeating is 1.
Right.
So Leonard Euler did a proof on this. It's not rounding to 1.
Right.
It actually is 1.
Yeah.
So therefore, you could look at it 2 ways. Number 1, in my book, PHILOMATH, also, we talk about digital root mathematics. So you could take any number, and I found patterns in DNA that there is a source pattern code inside our DNA that is self-correcting binary code, literally self-correcting binary code. All you have to do is count up the number of electrons, right, or protons, because these are stable elements, all of them that we use, like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, right, and phosphorus. So it makes literally binary code that only transitions to offsetting values that then determines all protein synthesis when you go into transfer RNA and uracil replaces thymine in the adenine-thymine pairing or adenine-uracil pairing. So it gives you an offsetting value. So now you've got ones and zeros, and 9 acts like 0. So all of them add up to 9 until you do uracil, and then it becomes 1. So you've got 9s and 1s, and 9 always has the power of 0. Why? Because 9, when you add it to any number, 9 plus 7 equals 16. But 16 is still 1 plus 6 equals 7. So it's as if it didn't exist. It doesn't matter what number you add it to. It will always end up acting like it didn't exist when you then subtract it back out of it. So 9 plus 22, right? So 22 plus 9 is going to give us 31, right? And 3 plus 1 equals 4, but 22 was also 4. It's like it didn't exist. There's a hidden pattern in numbers, and we call this mod 9 analysis. This mod 9 analysis is why Tesla talked about 3, 6, and 9. It's literally all based on 3, 6, and 9. All time, the electron is 3, the proton is 6, and the neutron is 9.
That's fascinating.
It's literally, we're in a matrix of number, right? So why does this work? Well, this 0.99999, because each 9 acts like 0, takes the property of 0, and also it equals 1 combined.
Yeah.
So you now have a superposition, a number that can be just like quantum computing, the X, which is basically taking the property of being both able to become 1 or 0.
Right.
It can be in superposition. So what this is actually telling us, the meaning is that nothing to the power of nothing equals everything.
Oneness.
Because 1 can be divided infinitely.
Yeah.
So therefore, it can be synonymous with everythingness.
Yeah.
So what does it mean? I think what it means directly pointed me, when I realized the meaning behind this, to a divine architect.
Wow. It's everything is divisible by 1, obviously. 1 is the primary unit of mathematics, unit T.
Yeah.
This is also like the word atonement, right? At one meant, right? This is obviously a very religious word. The one of Neoplatonism. Man, when you think about exponents, you're just saying, 2 squared is multiply 2 by itself twice, right? So 2 times 2. 1 to the power of 1 is 1 times 1, but 0 to the power of 0, you're saying multiply 0 by itself 0 times. So it almost like it's just wiping itself out, and what is left is everything. 1. Yeah.
Which is a mind blower when you think about that. So I think what it actually goes to is this, that we have exponentiation and logarithmicity in math. Yeah. So exponentiation, what you were just describing, logarithmicity would be through the roots of it, right? Through the roots of it. But we think the mirror of value is at the number 0. Because after 0, you've got value. Before 0, you have no value or negative value, right? But actually, the mirror of consciousness is at the number 1. How is the mirror of consciousness at the number 1? Well, because I could take any value and take its square root, right, 789, keep taking its square root, and eventually it will converge to the number 1. See that? That's through its square root. Now, if I'm going to take, 0.65, take its square root.
It's going to converge to 1.
It converges to 1.
Wow.
The mirror of consciousness between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is you, the number 1.
Wow. That's amazing. So then the gender, bring this back to the principle of gender, then this is something more like left brain, right brain, which is holism, reductionism something like maybe I said that backwards.
You're looking at the same principles. It's the line versus the curve.
Gotcha.
It's the square versus the circle.
I see.
It's both are embedded within each other. The sum of angles of a circle is 360 degrees. The sum of angles of a square is also 360 degrees.
This is an irreducible relationship because that's pi, right? It's infinite.
Right.
Yeah.
It's infinite. So it's just simply looking at it from a linear standpoint versus looking at it from a curvilinear standpoint.
So is there another mathematics out there that we could, it seems like mathematics is linear basis, right? If we're looking at things one.
Well, but we have irrationality. And irrationality comes from overlapping of circles. Okay. If I drop two pebbles in a still pond, eventually those circles will intersect each other, and they will reveal mathematical constancies.
So you could have a mathematics that's rooted in irrational numbers rather than rational numbers?
Yes. Okay. And we do. And it exists exactly that way because we love the curve.
Yeah.
We have to have that curve.
We do love the curve.
And so from that perspective, we are thinking all the time, it's like, I don't understand this thing. I don't understand how the feminine looks at things. So I have to argue with my, so-and-so, whatever, right? This drives me insane. I can't see it the way she sees it, but that makes life freaking interesting.
Yes.
And we're sitting here like perplexed for our whole lifetimes. Like, I'll never understand how women think. Okay, maybe I need to just accept that I'll never understand it. And maybe it's not even meant to be understood.
What's that term? And I think it's an ancient Greek word, tonos, right? The tension between two polar opposites that generates creativity itself.
Yeah.
Like it's, again, irreducible, ineradicable. You need that dynamic tension to create anything.
That, what you're describing, is this principle of gender.
I see. Fascinating stuff. The farm at Okefenokee is a revolutionary new regenerative agricultural community. It features an 8,000 tree olive orchard, which they use to make their own olive oil, as well as a very large pecan orchard. All the animals on the farm are heritage animals, with some varieties over 100 years old and others thousands of years old. Fresh eggs are produced daily by the farm's chickens. Also, there are over 1,000 beehives that pollinate the over 200 heirloom fruits and vegetables and provide honey to all the residents. The farm makes its own molasses, unrefined sugar, herbs, and spices. The farm also features an herbal apothecary and a commercial kitchen. These are just a few reasons why the farm is the healthiest place on earth. To learn more about the healthiest place on earth, go to okefarm.com and use discount code BREEDLOVE for $21,000 off custom cabin pricing. Again, to learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and be sure to tell them I sent you. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. So did the frequency of synchronicity in your life increase at a particular moment? Because you were just describing to me offline, you had a deluge of synchronicities recently. Like what?
Yeah.
When did that change for you, and what does that indicate to you based on your current worldview?
That the world around us is truly our inverse. I mean, just an example. We took a quick bathroom break. I had just told you the story about T-shirts that I have that say "I'm possible." So I get on a phone call with somebody who was wearing a T-shirt that I make that said "I'm possible," right? I take a screenshot of it. And that's like the 55th synchronicity of the day. On the way over here, I was on the phone talking about Jupiter, and the driver, after I got off the phone, said, do you realize that the moment you said the word Jupiter, we literally crossed an intersection that was Jupiter Road? And she said, I just thought that was strange. And I said, oh, you mean like right now there's this song, I think by Crosby, Stills and Nash or one of these old bands from the 70s. And it was like Sir Galahad. It was about Sir Galahad. And that moment that I heard Sir Galahad, we went by Camelot Apartments. That the world around us is actually just a reflection of what's inside of us. What we're thinking manifests in the outer world around us. And the more in tune to that we become, the more rapid it becomes. It literally becomes speaking and thinking things into reality.
Are you just more attuned and sensitive to it? Is that what it, like, almost like when you learn a new word, you start to hear it more frequently? Is it something like that?
Yeah, well, or, it's like, for example, if I said to you right now, the new symbol that I'm seeing a ton of is the diamond shape, right? So it'd be like a pentagonal form that's like shaped like a diamond. It goes in diamond rings and stuff like this. Now, the moment I just said this to you, you haven't noticed it yet, but I guarantee you're going to text me over the next few days saying, bro, what the hell is going on? I keep seeing that diamond shape everywhere. Because it's in your subconscious mind now. And that diamond actually represents the heart-brain awareness. That heart-brain awareness is what I've talked about earlier. It's when this merger of the heart being able to think and the mind being able to feel actually occurs, and then the world around you shifts into a new paradigm.
Every time you say that, I'm reminded, there's this song, the lyrics go something like, when I know how I feel, I'm free when I know how I feel, something like that. So when you have resonance between what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and that makes some kind of deep intuitive sense to me, because it's like, if you're having an emotional state, but you don't understand what it is, well, that's distressing. And if you're just thinking about something detached from emotion, that's sort of cold, calculating, isolating. But if you have the two working together in harmony, then you're actually a, I guess, competent, effective agent in the world.
Yeah.
What are the wavelengths these two different systems are running on? I mean, is left brain, right brain analogous to heart-mind relationship? That the heart is more holistic and the mind in general is more reductive? Or
in Hermetic wisdom, it's two snakes.
Okay. Is this the Ouroboros?
So we call them the Ouroboros is how we describe time, and how time like loops back. It's the snake eating its own tail.
Yeah.
But in Hermetic wisdom, we have this thing called the Staff of Hermes. I know you've seen it. The Staff of Hermes is like, it could be a sword or a staff that has two snakes intertwining around it, going up to the top. And each of the places where they intersect, going back and forth, is our chakras along this spine. And let's just say that the opposite of love is judgment. Think about that for just a moment. Because I know we associate having good judgment as a good thing, but that's also the backdrop that we're here to kind of learn through. Because love in its purest form is unconditional, right? Love in its purest form is unconditional. So therefore, any conditionality is opposed to that. I never felt comfortable with the opposite of love being hatred, because I know lots of people who hate people that they actually love, and vice versa. And by the same token, I never felt comfortable with it being fear either. It just didn't really match for me. So I started thinking it through, and I thought of it in terms of this Kundalini life force that comes up your spine. And the base of the spine would be the root chakra, and that would be one part of the 7 points, one part love, 6 parts judgment. Then you move to the next sacral center, which is at your sex chakra, and that becomes 2 parts love and 5 parts judgment. You move to the third or solar plexus, that's 3 parts love and 4 parts judgment. Now we're tipping the balance, we get into the heart. The heart becomes 4 parts love and 3 parts judgment. And then we go to the throat, it becomes 5 parts love and 2 parts judgment. And then we get the pineal gland, it's 6 parts love and 1 part judgment. And then we get to the crown chakra, and we're 7 parts love. And this is what we transit through as we move up dimensional frames. So you start off, in the 3rd dimension, otherwise we wouldn't have any form that would have any depth, right? We go into the 4th dimension, which is time. Time is motion. And then we're moving now, some are moving into a fifth dimensional or a throat chakra phase, which is where we come to the understanding and realization of what you just said, which is when you have a perfect alignment with what you're feeling and what you're expressing and what you're knowing that you're feeling. Because most of us are not even aware of what we're feeling because we repress it so deeply to the point where we just don't even want to remember. I know people that have literally blocked things out of the memory like it didn't exist. We do the same thing with our consciousness. The things we look at in the mirror we don't like about ourselves, we immediately start saying, I'm not that. That's why the name of God is I am that. There's nothing that you are not. I am that I am. So this concept of realizing that you have emotional states, which emotional states that you've not felt or registered, that you felt you needed to feel it, you felt it, but you suppressed it, you left it in your solar plexus. Every feeling that you have like that is what we call karma. You're building up karma that then has to be released and felt. So every feeling you've never allowed yourself to feel or acknowledge, and every word you never allowed yourself to express, also, when you're in complete alignment at the throat chakra level, has to be expressed and felt. That's how you clear your karma. You have to remember that you had to feel it and allow yourself to feel it. Otherwise, by suppressing it and not allowing yourself to feel it, it only builds up more that you have to transmute.
Wow. That's fascinating. So, I mean, I guess psychotherapy is in that domain then, that people actually need to speak out their traumas and release them. And wow. Fascinating. You mentioned this earlier. You mentioned this term a couple of times, game, right? That we were talking offline, you have a worldview that reality is a game. Maybe reality is not the right word. I'll let you correct me where I'm wrong, and that's, what struck me about that is I've thought about this a lot. That word game is actually very difficult to define. I feel like almost...
Well, you've been a gamer, right?
Yeah. I grew up playing video games.
Me too.
Obviously, as we talk about economics and whatnot, you get into game theory. And when you get into game theory, you start to realize basically organisms are constantly doing these expected value calculations, and almost every decision and action they make is game-like in a way. Even the cheetah, right, that's laying there is like deciding, am I going to get up and chase this prey? Not that they're cognitively doing, explicit mathematics, but they're saying, how do I feel? How much energy do I have? How far away are they? What are the conditions? And they kind of, do an implicit calculation before they get up and chase the prey. Well, obviously humans do that in all of our market interactions, even our personal relationships, right? Like, well, you say it like when someone's good at dating, right? They say, "Oh, he's got game or she's got game." So like dating's a game, love's like, and so what do we say? Games have rules typically. So while we all operate within the laws of physics, mathematics, Darwinism, these are kind of the rules. Games tend to have scoring systems, and Darwinism, I guess it's reproduction, how many offspring you have. In markets, the scoring system is money. And there's status games, right? Like how high are you in the social pecking order and whatever social circles you're running in. And then games are something that can be won or lost, or in which there are winners or losers. So how do we define the word game, and what is it about reality that is so game-like, or even game, like it is a game?
Yeah, it's funny. It makes me think of the words heroes, gamos, which you could hear as heroes game, right? Because it sounds like that. This is the Latin words, heroes, gamos. But heroes, gamos is actually a reference to the alchemical union, the merger of opposites, achievement of the philosopher's stone. Heroes, gamos is the reference to the divine masculine, divine feminine coming together. But that has been gamified. That's what I'm trying to say. That this experience of learning how to love and how to be loved. Now, let's think about this as a spiritual boot camp where we're here to, we have the benefit that the one divides itself into us so that it can perceive itself through our eyes. But then secondly, we as an individual unit of that consciousness, of the one divided, we're all divisions of the number one in some way, shape, or form. Then we have the opportunity to be able to realize and learn ourselves and fall in love with who we are. And we have a backdrop. The backdrop has to be duality. It has to be difficult. It has to be suffering. It has to be scarce. Otherwise, what are we transcending above? We have to learn how to see something with our eyes and realize that there's something more behind it. The worst, most difficult, challenging circumstance can actually be the best when you can see beyond what that moment in time is. You have a horrific accident or a death or something, and somehow you survived, and you could suffer from survivor's guilt. I've been in 3 plane crashes.
You have been?
Yeah. I've survived 3 plane crashes. And people get afraid when they fly with me and they're like, bro, I don't want to fly with you. I'm like, hey, you could look at it one way, which is like, I'm the unluckiest person in the world because I've been in 3 plane crashes.
I think you're the luckiest person in the world.
Exactly. But see, that's because you're an optimist. You see the world through that lens, but that's also why you're successful, because you automatically have this bias towards transmuting that which is negative into this is the best thing that happened.
Holy shit. You got to tell me more about that later.
I will. I'll tell you about it. It's crazy. It's crazy. One of them, I tell one of the stories in my TED Talk.
Okay.
It was the night my daughter was born, my eldest daughter.
Wow.
I lived in Australia at the time. And yeah, I've survived 3 plane crashes, and it's been nuts. I mean, literally, one of them was a helicopter crash that I was in just outside of Masada in Israel, in a chopper that had a single blade. If you get in a helicopter, make sure you get in one with 2 blades. Just word to the wise.
That's some practical math right there.
That's some practical math. Because when the chopper's engine stops and you've only got 1 blade, it doesn't really have much gliding ability, right? It's like we landed in the desert. It was brutal. And it was, we were just above Masada when the engine started cutting. And then we had a crash landing, and we ended up having to walk like 10 miles or something to get to the next place. But thank God we all survived it. I mean, it was kind of scary. It was very scary. Another time was when I was in Australia. My daughter was born. Another time I was on Delta Flight 88, flying from Singapore. This was on an MD-11, and MD-11 was famous for having problems with the landing gear not coming down. And so we were taxiing in finally to Los Angeles in the last segment of this long trip from Singapore. This is 1993. And the plane came in for the landing. And instead of, coming in on time, I noticed that there was no rain outside, but there was like what looked like fluid or liquid flying off the wings. And they were basically dropping the fuel because the landing gear wasn't coming down. We kept hearing the hydraulics get stuck. It'd be like, to get that landing gear down, and they would like stop, and then they'd start over and try it again. After like 2 hours of this, and the pilot from the first leg of the flight was sitting next to me in the business class area, and he was like getting really edgy, and everything is like going back and forth to the pilot's thing. They don't tell you when you're going to crash that you're going to crash until 1 second before you actually hit something. I'm dead serious. So right when we're coming in for the landing, instead of the plane coming in on the back and landing on the back wheels, when you don't have front landing gear to come down, you have to hit the fuselage. The nose has to hit the ground first, because if you do it this way, the plane will break.
Holy
right, and it's more dangerous.
Wow.
Right? So if you do it with the integrity of the hull and you hit it on the nose, so it hits like, so you're coming down, instead of coming down like this, you come down like this and try to skid it, then you have a chance that the integrity remains. And right before we hit, they were like, brace, brace, brace. And everyone was like screaming. It was out of control. It was just LAX. And then it made it on the news and everything. And this plane just like skids sideways. There's fire coming off the sides of it. I'm like, everyone's in the position. I had a huge bruise across my lap from it. And then we had to go out the chutes. And the plane went off the runway into the ditch. And so, of course, it's a big risk that it's going to, blow up or catch on fire or something. And so we all went out the yellow slides. And I remember looking back at the plane and going, how in the heck did I make it through that? But that's been a series of experiences in my whole life where it's been these realizations. So I'm not afraid of death now. It's like, Faces of Death for me is like, who cares? If you're in a game, it doesn't matter how you die.
Yeah.
We all die and we all get reborn again. What matters is how we choose to live. And are we going to live to the max, or are we going to live tepidly or fear-based way or whatever? And what are we going to try to figure out was the reason we chose what we chose? This school exists so that we can all transcend and realize that it's not about escaping Earth. It's not an escape room game.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you transcend this experience is by falling in love with it just as it is.
Learning to love.
Learning to fall in love with this earth experience.
Playing the game?
Playing the game.
Playing the game. And the object of the game is, you say transcendence. What does that mean in life? Is this enlightenment?
Enlightenment to me is when your expression of love for anything and everything supersedes and exceeds your desire for one objective truth. I don't need to be right. I'm here to love.
When you subordinate truth to love.
Yes.
Wow. Where does freedom fit into that? Because I've always found freedom, truth, and love to be very important values.
The Bohemian principles. Absolutely. I think freedom is this understanding of this interplay of destiny, is the free will of the higher self. Understanding that you chose it all. There's nothing here that is victimizing you. You chose to experience this. And I know this is difficult for people that are like, wait a minute, are you saying that children chose bad things that happened to them? Are you saying that all of these things? What I'm saying to you is that it is your you inverse. It's not another person's you inverse, because you have unique eyes. Your perception is making your own universe, and that universe is all a reflection of what's inside of you. The journey that you think you're on in the outside world is really just a journey within you. There's nothing that you're experiencing that doesn't have some tie back. So that's when you have to start asking, okay, why did I meet this person? Why am I going to Scotland and going to my ancestral homes, right? I went to these castles a month ago with Matthias Di Stefano. Why did I go to the Vatican? Why did I get knighted? What was the reason for all of these things? Why did I get the recognition? Why did I choose what I chose? What's the hidden message to expand to the next level? When you start to realize you're in the game, all the time you don't realize you're in the game, you realize was sort of hellish, because it's like suffering with no meaning. Suffering with no meaning is like math with no meaning. Math with no meaning is just suffering. Math with meaning is divine communication. Suffering with meaning is the gold of alchemy. So what do I mean by this? So our entire musical scale is separated out with the square root of 2. And when people ask me about this whole thing with Terrence Howard, they're like, okay, what do you think about 1 × 1 = 2? And I'm like, well, it cannot be. Because an entire scale of music starts with unison value of 1, and the next note is the 12/1 root of 2. And the next note, that would be da, 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 just like that, of a scale, and you multiply it by the unison value. The next note would be the 12/2 root of 2, and the next note would be 12/3 root of 2, and the next note would be 12/4 root of 2, all the way up to 12. You have 12 notes in the scale. And the middle of it is the diminished fifth, which is the square root of 2, or the 12/6 root of 2, the square root of 2. And what I realized is that we think of duality, and duality is related to dividing something into 2, right? So that which was unified becomes 2. So you could think of a circle that has a split, looks like a phi symbol for the golden ratio. Okay, so we can sort of grok that and understand the separation of 2. And so part of the reason why people get confused, and why Terrence, I think, was confused, is people would say, like Terrence did to me, well, $1 multiplied by $1 can't be just $1. It should be something more than $1. And I'm like, no, think of it like this. 2 times 3 is 2 groupings of 3.
Right.
Equals 6. So first of all, this is a massive indictment on the poor quality of our education system, that people are literally having to retrace the steps to this basic level. But I am happy that Terrence is actually forcing everybody to rethink assumptions.
It's interesting he used the dollar metaphor, though, because I think that was actually, fiat currencies, a contributor to the poorness of our education system.
That's a whole nother
can of worms, but also it's true what you're saying. It's not $1 grouping of $1. It's one group of $1 is one.
Yes. So this is where I was like, okay, let's look at the scale. If 1 × 1 = 2, then there would be no notes of differentiation between the first octave and the second octave.
Yeah.
You couldn't have it.
Right.
Period. But there's a deeper metaphor here. Math with meaning. Spirituality is all about applying the meaning, and it's entirely subjective. So I started thinking, okay, if the number 2 is duality, and cells divide, that's another thing that they use as their example. They're like, well, cells divide and they multiply. They said, no, cells multiply. No, Cells don't multiply. They actually divide,
Yeah.
right? So 1 divides into 2.
Right.
Equal,
0.5, 0.5.
and then 4,
Yeah.
and then 8. It's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 is the binary math,
Yes.
that basically populates the entire world around us.
Yeah.
And the truth of it is that the 1 is just divided, and 1 can divide infinitely. We can all understand that. You could cut a piece of pie into infinitely small pieces, right? So now if we think about what would be the essence of duality then, from a numerical perspective, would it not be the square root, the number that from itself can create itself? So because you have enough information in the number 2 to just take the function of the square root of 2. 2 numbers that would multiply by each other have the same numerical value, and that multiplication result comes out to be 2. And that's 1.4142, and it's an infinite number. It's infinite because it's the essence of. So you could say it's like the spirit of 2. It's infinite. And then you multiply the spirit by itself and it creates matter. You could say that 2 is a compression from a mathematical computer science perspective of the infinite nature of 2-ness, which is the square root of 2. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the essence of
Is that
duality.
Euler's number? The 1.1?
1.4142.
That is Euler's number then.
No, Euler's number is 2.718.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So what is that number named? Does that have a name or is that just square root of 2?
The square root of 2 is just square root of 2,
Square root of 2.
1.4142.
Okay.
So if we take that square root of 2 number, and we know that, okay, this is the essence of duality, which then leads to the essence of suffering, the essence of scarcity, the essence of all separation, the essence of everything that nobody likes about being here on this game called Earth, right? If we take that and we add it to the square root of 3, and when we think of the number 3, we think about religious connotations sometimes. I think of the Trinity.
Of course.
Think of a triangle. The triangle that's got the eye inside of it in Freemasonry.
Yeah.
Right? So the Trinity has its essence, and its essence would therefore be the square root of 3. So, okay, what is the square root of 2 plus the square root of 3? It's 3.146. It's really close to pi. That's kind of amazing. So that means that I have a diameter of 1, and the circumference is the sum of the square root of 2 and the square root of 3. It's really beautiful. I mentioned that earlier. But I looked at it one step further and said, okay, suffering that we personify in the number 2 and the square root of 2, when added to the context of the divine, the Trinity, and its essence, comes full circle. Suffering has meaning. So what degree of the circle would be represented by the component that was the square root of 2 versus the component that is the square root of 3? And how many degrees is that? So I ran the numbers on that. And guess what it comes out to? By the way, the square root of 2 looks like the symbol for Saturn. Literally looks like the symbol for Saturn. Saturn has a symbol in alchemy that looks like the square root of 2. And it's represented by the metal lead. Lead. So now we're going to look to see how many degrees of the circle is associated with the square root of 2 versus the square root of 3. And guess what it is? It's 161.816 degrees. And if you recognize that number, it's the most important number of all self-generating number systems. All plants, all DNA, everything is based on
Fibonacci,
1618. And not only is this 1618, but it has its palindrome embedded in its mantissa, in its tail. So it's 161.816, the same number, just in reverse, 618. And 1 over 1.618 equals 0.618. It's the only number that does that. So same number, exactly the same mantissa, except that it's got 1 in the front. This is what defines black holes and white holes. So what this is actually doing is it's taking the pain of your suffering, the difficulty of scarcity, and all the challenge that we face with it, and applying the meaning to it and saying, okay, when you look at suffering by itself, it's just suffering. When you understand that it's taking you through an alchemical journey to find your divine soul self, then it comes full circle for you. And that lead that was the square root of 2 becomes the golden number. Lead turns to gold. And it's a mathematical proof. When we understand that our suffering has a reason, it's not really suffering at all. It's just part of the game. And the real game is to remember why we chose what we chose and remember our own divinity within. That is the metaphor. You asked about metaphors earlier. That is the metaphor of this experience of difficulty and duality and challenge. And in this context, now, it doesn't matter what challenge you face. You are your avatar state. No matter what happens to you, it's like no fucks given. You find the beauty within every single experience, and then you fall in love with this world as it is. And as you fall in love with it, then you become the love. It's like, I loved what you said. BTC, be, right, the change.
Yeah.
If you want more love in this world, if you want more compassion, if you want more kindness, you want more charity in this world, then be the love, compassion, and the charity. Be the change.
This is almost a perfect reflection of the best dating advice in the world, I think, is like to become the partner you want to be with. It's like you want someone that's honest, loyal, loving, whatever the criteria, like you need to, it's not looking for that person, as you said earlier, chasing the girls chases them away. You have to go within and work on yourself and try to become what you actually seek. And then that vibe attracts your tribe, so to speak, right? Those people then come into your life. And that resonates almost perfectly with what you're saying there. I have to ask you, this is a bit of a tangent, but this word, we talk a lot about the nature of language on this show. And one that's really got me going in circles recently is a word you've invoked a lot today, which is the word context. Now, the word con, or the prefix con, is something like together, right? And then text is obviously text, right?
Yeah,
like
con in Spanish, right? Conmigo, they're like with me.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we have a lot of words like conjugate, right? To put things together, continue, so something like, it's a prefix that I think means together, bring together, you said with. I'm reading a book right now. It's an Ayn Rand,
Which one? I love Ayn Rand.
Objectivist epistemology. So
I haven't read that one yet.
Yeah, it's good. She's describing in a very unique way how we form concepts and how language is related to concepts.
Have you read Fountainhead?
No, I've read Atlas Shrugged though.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
or
the
listened
one
to it.
you asked me what other books to read.
Yeah,
that's on the list.
Fountainhead. Okay,
Fountainhead.
Anyways, in her objectivist epistemology, this term context comes up a lot, right? That you actually, the concept itself only makes sense in the context of everything else, right? That you have
It's
to
like
be
suffering.
Exactly. Which scale you're looking at it determines the meaningfulness of the concept. So how do we define the word context? It sounds like bringing all the words together, all the knowledge together, all the circumstances together, considering whatever we're looking at in the context. I don't know.
To me, it's funny because it's almost exactly what you described with the one not being able to experience limitation. So it creates us to experience limitation for it and experience it through our eyes of perception.
Right.
It's like adding this paradox back in, which is also related to that masculine and feminine that has this little bit of offset that'll never understand entirely each other, but that's what makes the world turn. It's like the engine of everything. It's the underlying principle. Why is the universe dark? Why is dark matter dark? Maybe, like Buckminster Fuller said, metaphysical gravity is love. The aspects of the universe we don't understand are the reason why we're here. The thing that binds the universe together is that metaphysical gravity. So in that context, the things that are dark to us and not understood by us shouldn't be something we should be afraid of. And just like adding the limit to that which is limitless, you can't describe context without the context. It's this paradox. It's a riddle wrapped within an enigma, right? This is the thing. And we have these things that exist so often that it causes me to say, okay, there's another matrixy thing there, right? And there is something with text, context, with text. I mean, we use the term text as like, I'm sending you a text.
Yeah, but if we look back to the ancient Greek, it's probably more like logos, right?
Logos.
Yeah.
Okay. So you asked about Philosopher's Stone. What is it really? It's the merger of logos and pathos. That leads to the ethos. That is the Philosopher's Stone. It's the hexagon merging together with the pentagon. You know, every nucleotide pair is based on a hexagon and a pentagon right next to each other. That's the exact shape that it takes.
Didn't know that, no.
Yeah, it's the hexapentacus. So Buckminster Fuller made the Epcot Center thing, right? Which is based on the hexapentacus. It's a buckyball.
Is the logos and pathos merger you just described, is it like knowing what you feel and feeling what you know, like you said earlier? Because logos is logic, pathos is emotion, ethos is more like ethics. Yeah.
But it's not ethics from the moralistic perspective.
Right.
It's like this divine knowing.
Right.
It's being able to put yourself in the divine, which is, in Hebrew, we have this letter, which is called the Shin, right? So the name of God in Hebrew is Yahweh, right? Which means Aye Eshe Aye, which is I am that I am. But that name changes when you add a Shin to the middle of it. So it becomes Jehovah, or Yahweh becomes Yahshua, Yeshua, Christ consciousness. The Shin represents fire or spirit. And in fact, in the Solomon's Temple, there was, and I just watched this film about this, Leonard Nimoy was talking about how he chose, because he actually decided to use live long and prosper, right? Because they needed something culturally, because he was supposed to get married to some Vulcan woman in one of the original Star Treks. He's like, I need something to say, here's my culture, live long and prosper. But it was also the same thing that Mork from Ork did on, like, you know, the 70s show. It was like Nanu Nanu. This is actually an ancient mudra. This mudra represents the letter Shin in Hebrew. It's the shape of the letter Shin. It's like, it looks like a little crown. It's got 3 parts, right? And so what the Berat Kohanim would do, they would pray in the Solomon's Temple, and they would hold their hands up like this, and they'd say a prayer. They'd all close their eyes, and they would wail very dissonant chords to do it. And they would say a prayer. The prayer was, you know, very similar to, you know, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'er. I know this prayer that they do when they are any high holidays, right? The Jewish people do. I'm not Jewish, but I learned Hebrew. So what the point of this is to bring the divine aspect of wisdom, Sophia, into the tabernacle or into the temple. So they would close their eyes because you couldn't look upon her, this dark feminine thing you could not look upon. And this was their prayer. So this aspect of the mudra and what it actually means is all metaphor, again, all metaphor for us finding and embracing the darkness within ourselves that we thought we were afraid of before, but now realizing that in that is the highest soul growth, the greatest expansion and shift of our mental cage of belief that limits how much our soul can expand into. That's the true alchemy. The logos, which is the mind, the hexagon shape, right? The same as what we see with bees and everything, the industriousness around the bee, merging with the flower or the rose. The planet Venus has a path that has a 5-sided path. It looks literally like a rose in the way that it moves around in our night sky. This is the beauty of the irrational and the rational. And when the irrational and the rational can come together, that is the beauty of Philosopher's Stone. So how all this applies to Bitcoin, in my mind, is that it is referencing an entirely new era of how humanity, I'm actually getting emotional on this, moves from the era of human doing into human being. We don't need overlords anymore because we're ready to ascend and realize our own sovereignty. What Bitcoin and the beauty of Satoshi Nakamoto, which is the wisdom from the field, has done and will continue to do for humanity, will be the elephant in the room or the lion that walks in that doesn't need to roar. It changes everything in its wake without having to lift a single gun or shed a single drop of blood. To me, it's so profound because it references this stage of alchemy for us where we move into this Philosopher's Stone. And that's what's exciting about it. So whoever Satoshi Nakamoto is or was this whole thing is based on the exact principles, because you asked, what are the rules of the game? The guideline to the game is the 7 Hermetic principles to me.
That's phenomenal. On the lion that comes into the room and doesn't need to roar, it's funny that you use that analogy because the other thing Bitcoin, or another thing Bitcoin is the most truthful construct humans have ever created, right? An unalterable record keeping system.
That's what the Akashic record is.
Yeah, and there's this quote about truth, comparing it to a lion. It says, the truth is like a lion. You don't need to defend it. Just set it free and it will defend itself. And that's what Bitcoin basically is, right? Like we don't, I mean, I guess, sure, we have to build it out and whatnot, but it is this very hard to kill thing like the truth, right? Very hard to hide, very hard to stop, just keeps emerging. And the other thing you were saying there, the irrational and the rational coming together.
Yeah.
That also resonates with Bitcoin. There's the irrationality of sort of pure Darwinian self-preservation, right? The old saying, all is fair in love and war, for instance, captures this. Mm-hmm. And we all have that because we are all part animal, basically, mm-hmm. right? But then there's this other, the divine logos that's in each of us, right? You know, Aristotle would say we're the rational animal, right? On the other side of our animality is our rationality. And so there is this logos component that we have that we've used to overcome our animality increasingly as we progress through civilization. And Bitcoin does seem like it's bringing those two things together, right? It's honoring the individual self-interest, right? It's rewarding people to propagate its network, to save in it, et cetera. You know, it's something that has no marketing department, no budget, no CEO, no company, yet it just is continually growing mm-hmm. by leveraging those incentives of and pandering even to individual self-interest, but it's based on this inviolable mathematical logic. You know, it's this fixed supply of 21 million, thermodynamic integrity, all of these things. So it has a strange fusion of the rational and irrational.
Which is also genius, and even, you know, it makes me question what was the rationale behind the 21 million?
Yeah.
Why 21?
Right.
It's palindrome of 12.
Yeah.
Which is also a divine number, and 12 and 21 have huge relationships and relate to the electron, right? So we could talk about physics and how genius it is from the physics perspective, that there is mass, energy, time, and information equivalence. Mm-hmm. And therefore currency is related to all those things.
Yes, no, spot on. That's one of the definitions I've given of money. It's a triune of time, information, and energy, a triunity. Because obviously it's temporal in this sense that, well, that's one of the descriptions of Bitcoin, is that proof of work is a decentralized clock. It's even called block time, right? It creates its own time effectively. Another way to say that in a conceptual money sense is that money is the tool we use to trade our time, right? You go to work to earn money, and then you take your money into the market to obtain time or the products of time from other people. So it's got this temporal quality. It's also information, because price signals are coordinating markets. Right? We don't need to communicate explicitly about what we're doing. We just see the prices of things going up and down, and entrepreneurs mm-hmm. use that as inputs to make decisions. And then money is also this energetic quality, in that if energy is the capacity to do work, I mean, that's what money is, right? Mm-hmm. It's a reservoir that you can use to deploy and get things done, basically. Mm-hmm. It's
Let me throw something out at you. This might kind of like blow your mind. Maybe. What if the Akashic record as we know it? You know what an Akashic record is?
Yeah, could you describe this? So I've only heard this from people that have done ayahuasca, and they said they've talked about the Akashic records, which are, I don't know, the universal database, something like that?
Yeah. Because in this game matrix, the only thing is real is what we feel. Because we all have different stimulus. Remember, you have this whole matrix of mind that's built on sound and light. Mm-hmm. And what you're shown is not necessarily what happens to you, or what you experience is not necessarily what happens to you. How you perceived it is what happened to you. Mm-hmm. And then that informs a certain emotional state, right? So there's this Ronald Reagan story. It tells the story of two kids. One kid, super optimist. They're both twins. The other kid, super pessimist. Psychiatrist comes, meets the parents. So I want to do a test on Christmas morning. He says, okay, so they set up one room with all the best toys, and they set up the outhouse with manure. They take the little boy that is the pessimist to the room with all the best toys, swings open the door and says, Merry Christmas, all of this is yours. And the kid bursts into tears and is like, why are you crying? He says, I'm going to lose these toys. Some people are going to take them and steal them, and some are going to break, and then I'll be really sad. Takes the optimistic little boy to the outhouse, swings open the door, it's full of manure, And he jumps up and down. Oh, goody, I'm so happy. He says, why are you so happy? And he says, well, with all this manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. It's not what happens to us that actually happens to us. It's what we believe happens to us. So it's that reframing that determines the outcomes of what eventuates after that, right? So when you look at it in that context, then the Akashic record of time is the summation of all those emotional states in blocks.
Wow.
As a blockchain.
Wow.
Literally, blockchain is a mirror. Just as right now we're seeing AI become sentient of itself in the not too distant future. Kabbalistic Jews, you know what they do when they get to a certain level of their spiritual practice? They make a golem. You know what a golem is? A golem is a little clay man. Little clay man, because they want to emulate the creation of man, of Adam, by God. That's the part of the spiritual practice that you have to start to think and feel like God. That's why drawing with geometry tools without measurement is close to being like the architect. You step into those shoes when you start doing that. That's why Freemasonry and all these guys have done this as a practice. It's a meditative practice to draw geometry. Wow. It will literally transform you. It's been the most transformational thing I've ever done. But you start to realize that all my emotional states is what became my space-time memory. And so therefore, in the future, you start thinking, okay, well, the past and the present determine the future. I can grok that. But what about the future? Can it determine the past? Well, if entanglement is correct, which we know that it is, then the past determines the future, but the future also determines the past. They're entangled. One is an electron going towards the future, and its positron pair is spinning down from the future down to the present. They annihilate each other and create a gamma photon burst, annihilation. That annihilation is what we call the passage of time. That's a moment of observation. But we're never in the future, and we're never in the past. We're only ever in now. It's like stepping in a river. You can't step in the same river twice. You're only experiencing now. So this means that you have an Akashic record of all your emotional states. But as soon as you reframe your perspective on what happened in the past actually changes. The meaning of it changes.
Yes.
So a war that happens that was like really bad, or there's a version of history that was in higher dimension, like Atlantis or some combined global civilization that was all in higher dimension because that was in this Earth's different stage in higher dimension. It will not be remembered by us until we move into that dimensional frame. And then all of a sudden, as if by Mandela effect, it repopulates that whole history. Same thing with how we look at, that was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Then I changed my view on it, reframed it, and understood the alchemy and beauty of it. And I realized it's the best thing that ever happened to me. History then changes. This is the path that we're in. So each person literally becomes like their own node validator.
This is so good. I'd like to thank my friends at Swan Bitcoin for their long-standing support of the What is Money show. Swan's mission is to help millions of people get into Bitcoin, so they built the best solution to set up recurring Bitcoin buys and automatic withdrawals into cold storage. With the Swan app, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start buying Bitcoin. If you're a new customer, you get $10 in free Bitcoin for signing up, and the first $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy incurs 0 fees. If you're an existing Swan customer, then the next $10,000 of Bitcoin you buy now incurs 0 fees. So if you love to recommend Bitcoin to friends and family, then Swan is the best place to start. So go to swanbitcoin.com/breedlove to get started today. Again, that's swanbitcoin.com/breedlove. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE. I want to read this excerpt from a piece that you wrote. Title is 24 Precepts of Universal Mind. And you wrote, quote, as an avatar, you will learn to see the unseen, start believing, if not already, in miracles. Mira, Spanish for look. Kol is
Clay.
clay, I guess Spanish for key. So miracle is look/see the key. To see patterns and recognize repetitions within your life experience and the others you perceive. Study the art of science and the science of art. Realize that everything connects to everything else. Remind yourself daily to reverse the age-old saying of seeing is believing and embrace that indeed believing is seeing instead. Is that what you're describing here with the flow of time reversing? It's not just cause. I mean, this is like theory and practice in a way, right? Like it's the frame we put around. So as you said, the frame you put around a past experience can change the meaning of that past experience. This is like when you watch a movie. I had family in town this weekend, so we watched some movies. We watched The Imitation Game.
Oh, great movie.
We watched
Cryptography.
The Prestige, and we watched Shutter Island.
All good movies.
All three movies where the end of that movie, the future, changes the meaning of the past at the end, right? Like that's the classic plot twist.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like that, right? So you can actually change your frame down the road and reinterpret past experiential data to change your life experience.
That's right.
Not that you change the past, but you change what it means for the future.
The meaning is what matters.
Yes.
The meaning and what you take in is what matters. So the only thing that's real is what we feel. So therefore, we populate this Akashic record and transmute suffering into gold of soul evolution. It's up to us to reframe how we see the past.
Yes.
And this becomes the most powerful alchemy that you can do because then everything became divine.
I want to talk about a couple of major perspectival changes that this is not. I always want to be careful in these conversations because sometimes it sounds like it drifts into woo-woo town, but it's like, no, this is so fucking real.
No, it's called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle.
Yeah.
And it's literally what explains physics.
A couple of examples I want to throw out and see what you think about these. One, Copernicus, right? We had all seen the sun rising and setting since time immemorial, right? And we just thought sun goes around Earth, right? That is the data. Everyone sees it. Everyone agrees upon it. That's what it is. Along comes Copernicus with some mathematics and says, actually, you guys are exactly wrong. Earth goes around sun. It's an inversion of your perspective. The data is unchanged, but the meaning is literally couldn't be more opposite, right? It's a complete inversion of the meaning. Another one was Darwin. I heard this on some lecture the other day. We actually discovered the transitional skull between primate and man pre-Darwin. It was like 50 years pre-Darwin. We discovered the skull, but we couldn't make any sense of it, right? We just thought this was
Lucy.
Yeah, maybe it was Lucy. And it was just some bizarre, like we didn't know. But then when Darwin created the theory, right, he published The Origin of Species, we had the context. Then we go back to the data and we say, oh, this is the transitional animal.
But we do this with all new knowledge, by the way. All expansion of consciousness causes us to reframe all previous knowledge and consciousness.
Yeah. So I just wanted to throw those examples out there as like, it is the theory or the believing, I guess, is the frame we're putting on the seeing, and it can actually change the meaning of what you're seeing.
So let's take it to another level, right? Are we still looking at it in a limited viewpoint? Maybe there's still a higher perspective. We always have to be open to maybe there's a higher perspective. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let me borrow this.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I showed you this, right? And it cast a shadow on the wall behind me, the shape of a circle, right? I would say, what am I holding? And you might say, you're holding a circle. Whatever it is circular, right? And then I would say to the other person that's sitting over there and that's casting a shadow on this wall, what am I holding? And say, that's a rectangle, right? Just this part of the bottle, okay? I have the higher knowledge that it's both. It's a cylinder. This is a cylinder that takes the shape in, one perspective viewpoint as a rectangle, and to you, it's going to take the shape of the circle.
Right.
This is what's happening around the world. We argue about things that are actually the same because we are missing the higher reference point that it's actually a cylinder. And in order to see that, you can't solve problems, as Einstein said, with the same level of thinking that perceive the problem. You have to be able to expand to a higher dimensional frame, zoom out, so the tree's not too close to the forest, right? So you're not too close to the forest to see the tree. That becomes the critical aspect of this. So even with Copernicus, I'll give you the example of what I mean.
It's almost like Plato's cave at a higher level, higher dimensionality.
Perfect. So here's Copernicus. So Copernicus, yes, advanced us and said, no, it's not geocentric. It is heliocentric. Okay. Yeah, but that's looking at it as if we're stationary. Because actually, if you look a little bit deeper at it, our solar system is moving around. It is, by the way, the Earth's wobble is 25,920 years. Right? That's how long it takes to go through the 4 North Stars that we have. This time we're in is Polaris, and 6,000 years ago it was Thuban, which is in Dracos, the dragon. And then 6,000 years before that, it was in Lyra, which was a star called, what's the name? Vega. And then the other star that it was 6,000 years before that was Deneb in Cygnus, which is the Swan. So those 4 constellations are embedded within them are our North Stars. And so our Earth wobbles and it moves to different North Star positions. And then that's what people that would be navigating on the seas would use to be able to navigate true north, right? It's not fixed, right? We think it's fixed. It's not necessarily fixed.
It's all dependent on the context.
That's right. It's all dependent on the context. So same thing with flat Earth, right? It's like if you are on Earth and you don't see beyond the horizon, then you might think everything is flat, right? Okay, that's a fair thing. Till you get in a plane, go all the way around the Earth, as I said earlier, come back to where you started from, okay? But what if time's the same? Our lifetime is only 70, 100 years. That's not long enough. That's only 1 degree of this precessional cycle of 24 to 26,000 years. And it just so happens that the distance that Earth is from the center of the galaxy is 26,000 light years. What a coincidence. What a coincidence. See, I don't believe that the speed of light is actually the speed of light. I actually think it's the speed of our perception. It's not geocentric. It's not heliocentric. It's you-centric. It's a you inverse. You will always be at the center of the universe. And guess what? The universe is not coincidentally 13.8 billion years old. That's directly related as well to the fine structure constant and to the golden angle. It'll probably always be that age from any reference point you look at it from. So our aspect of what we understand of time, what if time is actually spheroidal or toroidal, that is a Klein bottle or a Mobius strip that loops back on itself, that what we consider our distant past might actually be our distant future at the same time. That consciousness is separated itself into this construct for the game of past and future, but yet neither actually exist. All incarnations of you are existing simultaneously. So this means that as you think about our solar system traveling around the galaxy, you have to look at this differently. Think of the sun going like this and the Earth going around it as it's moving.
Corkscrewing,
Corkscrewing. So it all depends on your frame of reference. And we have to expand our conscious awareness to be able to see and perceive higher dimension. And that is what the game is about, so that you can get to the higher dimensional frames to perceive love and suffering and challenge and difficulty and filial relationships and partnerships and the whole nature of your relationships. Maybe the people that have done the worst things to you in this life actually promised as part of their soul journey to be the villain in your life. We clap at the end of going to see Phantom of the Opera. We all stand and give the standing ovation to the Phantom, even though he's the villain. But maybe it's because all of us have a villain within us. And that villain just wants to be loved. So it's all in the context. This entire experience can be a beautiful one when we decide that it is absolutely meaningful and divine.
It's beautifully said. Now, the frame of reference as the belief or the interpretive structure through which we are filtering perceptual data, right? It seems like the most useful frames of reference are those that have the least variance, right? The most fixed frames of reference. You described the North Star, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason the North Star is useful is because it stays in one position and you can orient yourself around it.
And
right?
that's true for 6,000 years.
Yeah. So it's the constancy. So I was wondering if there's a connection here between the constancy or fixity of something like the North Star as a frame of reference that's useful for navigation, and the constancy of mathematical constants.
Oh, yeah.
And then by extension, you know where I want to go with this is like Bitcoin. For the first time in human history, we have a monetary constant. We've never had a fixed supply anything. It's a asset constant, if you will, right? There's never been something that has a perfectly fixed supply. We don't know the supply of anything other than Bitcoin with perfect certainty.
But the paradox within that is it can still be divided infinitely.
Yes, divided infinitely, but never inflated. And you would be surprised how many people that confuses the shit out of.
It's like multiplication and division. It's the same thing.
I've seen so many dumb politicians be like, "Oh, Bitcoin's not scarce. You can divide it infinitely." And it's like, "Oh man, it's the whole slicing the pizza."
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but it doesn't make more pizza.
Exactly.
It just cuts.
It's really not complicated.
It's not complicated.
Yeah. What is there a connection there between like the utility of a frame of reference? Is it based on its constancy or fixity? And then does that relate to mathematical constants? Does that relate to the constancy of 21 million Bitcoin as being a more optimal money?
I believe our entire experience in this U inverse is based on ratio.
Okay. Ratio
is what matters, because without context, and context is actually a reference to ratio.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a surprise that geometricians throughout history became the philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can point to so many. Aristophanes, Democritus, you can go all the way through the Greek philosophers, but actually, I wish I could name the ones that were in the Egyptian mystery schools. But they were not nameable because they were in mystery schools.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point. The Egyptian mystery schools in the land of Chem were teaching about the black arts. Now, it wasn't because it was necessarily black skin, although there were black skinned people there.
Mm-hmm.
The Kushite people were black.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't reference that. What it's referencing is the unknown, the absorption versus the reflection. We study in alchemy, and alchemy is from that word al, which is a word for God, right? Al or the, El, it's like El in Spanish. Chem is this black. Chemistry is from that, the black arts. It's from the land of Chem. They thought it was because Chem was a reference to the black soil, that it used to be very fertile. But we don't remember that now because it's just all sand for the most part, unless you're right next to the Nile River. But the truth of it is, I believe that this world is actually about us learning about our darkness within and being able to figure out how to subdue it and allow the supersedence of love over and above this judgment aspect, right? So it becomes unconditional, and we start to see the world in a very different light. Our relationships change. The people that come into our life change. Our relationships are all about soul alchemy. Into me, see into me. So that's what intimacy is. You see into your partner, you see a reflection somehow of you that you can now love. And as she can love you, she can teach you how to love that aspect of yourself. And it could be flipped the other way around, male and female. It doesn't really matter. But this is this separation that then becomes whole into divine union. So you asked about frequency. I talked about the two snakes. So there's something called the Ida and the Pingala. Well, in music, we have this whole controversy amongst those in the musical community that are into the geometry. They talk about, no, it's got to be 432 hertz. I'm like, no, it's 528 hertz. You may have heard of these, right? 528 hertz, some people say, that's the heart frequency. No, 432 is the perfection of the mathematics. Well, the funny part about it, actually, is that what if I told you they're part of the same scale? They're perfectly part of the same scale. 432 hertz in a 12-note scale is the eta, the one snake. So the snake would be how you describe a sine cosine wave, exactly how music resonates when you're looking at it through an oscilloscope. But 528 hertz is a note in a 24-note separation of the exact same scale.
It's a different denominator.
That's right. And that is the Pingala. The two are part of the same 24-note quarter tone scale, which then unites all Western music and all pentatonic scales in indigenous peoples into one scale. The Egyptians use a 24-note scale. The Indians use 24-note scale. The Vedic mathematicians, the prime number patterns based on 24. Every prime number that's over 5 will always square to a multiple of 24 plus 1 without exception.
Wow.
It's all about 24ness. Buckminster Fuller teaches us about the cube octahedron, the vector equilibrium, the one geometric form that has equidistance between the center point and every vertex of it. That cuboctahedral structure is perfection. And what that does is actually giving us another way of looking at pi. It's triangles and squares, and then one adjacent side, 3, 1, 4. 3, 1, 4, 3, 1, 4, all the way around it, 14 sides, 24 edges, and 12 vertices. The geometry of what we experience is all based on ratio. So without the context of some scale of reference, you cannot perceive anything. Without the context of pain, how can you perceive pleasure?
Right.
You have to know the opposite thereof. That's why learning through opposites becomes such a critical aspect of this game. The learning through opposites provides the context, which is really just another way of saying providing the ratio relationships.
Wow. So perception itself, conception by extension, right? Because conception is rooted in perception, obviously. These are rational processes then, right? And that they involve this ratio, this mode of comparison between two things, right? Numerator and denominator in mathematics,
Yes.
but we're really just comparing
one versus another.
anything against anything else.
And then in that difference, reality is formed.
Yes. Wow. Fascinating.
So I think of it like this. The higher self is the conceiver.
Okay.
The brain is the receiver.
Uh-huh.
Your conscious mind is the perceiver.
I see.
From conceiver to receiver to perceiver.
Okay.
And how you tune your heart will determine that perception. That becomes what populates your Akashic field.
Right.
You become one node validator of a gigantic blockchain of everyone's sum total of emotions on every possible state.
Right. Now, and this gets, you brought up the term judgment. I want to ask you about that because in one sense, you want sound, rational judgment, right? So you can make good decisions in life and, use this tool, rationality, and use it effectively and competently to deal with, all the complexities of life. But in another sense, you don't really want to be necessarily judgmental about people. It sounds like you want to love people more and judge.
This is where I think Jesus crushed it, right? To be honest, like Jesus said, look, here are the two great commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. We all have heard that, right? Every religious text from Bhagavad Gita, you go through the Upanishads, everyone has always been taught this same exact principle. You talked about sat is truth in Sanskrit. Sat Guru, it's interesting, he calls himself Truth Guru, right? Guru itself, do you know what guru means? Gu means darkness. Ru means light. So guru simply means light from darkness. It's not light by itself. That's why I don't even like when people say, oh, I'm a light worker. I'm like, no. I had this company pitch me and say, can we send you a hat that says our logo, it says like light worker on your podcast? I'm like, you know what? First of all, I don't do that. Secondly, the only time I would wear something is if I had something that said light worker and shadow worker too. It's by understanding our darkness, not running away from it or avoiding it, that we actually can have true transmutation in our lives and meaningful evolution. I think that's just a metaphor for the collective conscious as well. And what we are experiencing through these ratio of experiences, right, is helping us to populate this Akashic field, to transmute all of our experiences into this higher wisdom. And this is wisdom, being able to see the context of everything because you understand the ratio relationships of each of these dualities.
And so ratio must be related to metaphor then. We've brought up the word metaphor a lot, and that, the essence of a metaphor is to understand one thing in terms of another thing. Typically in the books I've been reading, you talk about the target domain is basically the numerator and the source domain is the denominator. So we have a lot of different conceptual metaphors, right? Like, what's one? Time is money, right? Like, how did you spend your day yesterday? Make sure you invest your time wisely, things like this. We talk about the conception of time as if it is money so we can communicate about it. We're like mapping our experience of money onto our conception of time in language. So what is that just... So metaphor is more than linguistic then. Is this just another... It's like metaphor and ratio are almost the same thing, it seems like, but metaphor is traditionally considered more linguistic. Ratio is traditionally considered more mathematic. Both mathematics and natural language are languages. Are these just kind of two different...
It's interesting. I think of the word metaphor. So first of all, meta, Greek, means beyond.
Yes.
Right, beyond.
Yeah.
For is a reference to purpose.
Yeah.
Like wherefore.
Right.
So purpose beyond?
Beyond purpose. Huh.
Kind of deep. Because
it reminds me of reason. They talk about reason has this ecstatic nature.
Like deeper meaning.
Like reason's intended to disrupt itself or reach beyond itself. And so metaphor, ratio lets us go beyond.
Yeah, and even the concept of Thoth and the man who is Enoch, who becomes angelic in the biblical story. He becomes the metathrone.
Yeah.
Metathrone is a reference to the throne beyond, right? And the throne beyond is from the throat chakra. So when you move into the fifth dimensional experience, the first stage of that fifth dimensional experience in the throat is self-awareness. The second stage becomes self-actualization. So people that have started to figure out, okay, who they are, then they can also start to learn how to manifest, but it's still time dependent. Then you get to the third stage of the throat chakra and it becomes more mystical, more magical. All your experiences are synchronistic somehow. It's like seems like water's parting in front of you. This becomes your day-to-day life. And this is self-transcendence. When you've moved to the stage of self-transcendence, you're on your path towards individuation. It doesn't mean that you've gotten rid. A lot of people that go through a spiritual path start saying, I'm changing my name to One Divine, or I'm going to change my name to the person who was formerly known as Robert Grant. No, that's not really quite nailing it. You're somewhere in the path, but you're not exactly where you yet wanted to be. I have this funny meme that was Matthew McConaughey, and there's like 6 different stages of Matthew McConaughey's spiritual transformation. And the first one was, life is easy and great. Have you seen this one?
Yeah,
it's
different
hilarious.
movies, right?
Yeah, they're all movies.
They talk about different stages in your Bitcoin journey too.
Exactly, different stages in your Bitcoin journey. It's like, life is easy and great. I'm all happy and it's all good. And then like the next scene, he's like, wait a minute, nothing is as I thought it was, everything I learned, I have to unlearn. And life is kind of about us deconstructing our perceptions to break out of the self-limiting belief systems that then cage our consciousness from greater expansion. So the heart never breaks, only the ego does.
Wow.
Right? The heart never breaks, only the ego does. So to go to the next stage. The next stage is he's like, they're out to get us, the Illuminati of the 13 bloodlines are out to get us, and the reptiles are going to eat us all, right? Type of thing. We're under their control. And then the next stage is him in some movie about 1776 where he's like standing on a lawn with a gun. And he's like, get off my lawn, right? And then the next stage is, I realize that my ultimate revenge is to fall in love with all of it. And it's like him walking on a beach in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right? I really think that, memes are like the archetype of how we live our lives now. And I think that there's so much deep metaphor and truth to this. We are not here to hate ourselves. We're actually here to integrate the ego and the shadow into one. That is the alchemy of the light and the dark merging. That is the guru. And we tend to get stuck in this thing. It's like, I'm going to get rid of, down to the point where you see it manifesting in the collective sense, where people are like, I hate humans. Humans are bad for Earth. We need to get rid of all of the humans on Earth, because without humans, Earth would be a better place. Dude, we are the fruit of the earth.
Yeah.
We are here as the fruit and the children of this earth. You can't sit here and say the fruit, that the tree would be better off without the fruit.
Exactly.
Or the same thing with, assigning gender or calling gender to be. It's like, wait a minute, just learn the acceptance and the love.
Yeah.
This notion of that I'm bad and humanity is bad, therefore I'm going to be against, humans even existing. That is a perversion in a way of more and more self non-acceptance, and basically rejection.
A performative contradiction too. It's
Yeah.
like when a human's sitting there saying that humans are the bane of existence. It's like, I just can't take people seriously when they say that thing. I'm like, if you actually believed what you said, you would go run off a cliff right now. Like you would just kill yourself. Because if you actually thought humans were bad, the only way you could do anything through your actions is to go and end your life, basically.
We all fall in this world right now. We see this where you have relationships where often one in the partnership will say, oh, I broke up with this so-and-so because they were a narcissist. And they refer to them as my narc, right? My narc. and then it's like, I'm an empath and you don't know how hard it is for me to feel everything. It's like a difficult world for me to be in because I feel everything. And then it's like, oh, well, let's all go to a movie. And then, no, I'm sorry, we can't because so-and-so is on the couch. She's upset because she's feeling everything, right? And everyone's supposed to like fawn over her and everything. That is a narcissist. It's just a different form of narcissism. It's inverted narcissism.
Right. Well, it's that type of person you said earlier where they don't acknowledge they have darkness, right? They're putting all the blame on someone else.
That's right. It's the Greta Thunberg.
Yes, exactly.
All she's going to experience in her life is more and more pain and suffering because she's just going to continue to judge and say, I'm going to put myself behind every single cause that's going to end the world of what we would call climate change, when actually it's just a cycle.
Yeah.
And the truth is that she's making all this vitriol around it, and it's only creating more vitriol for it. And all she'll face is she's living in a world that is inundated by humans destroying Earth.
Yeah.
That's not a fun place to live. Once she learns acceptance, and once we all learn acceptance for those things we don't like, and just allow it to exist, you don't have to agree with the ethics of it. You don't have to substantiate or to support in any way, shape, or form those things you don't like. You just have to learn how to allow it to exist without thinking, how do we eradicate the world of it? Because it's no different than you trying to eradicate certain aspects of your personality that you find uncomely or unsightly.
This is a great lesson, actually. It's like, I get very frustrated with fiat world sometimes, and I think I need to just learn to let it exist a little more and just accept it.
Maybe then the transformation will happen.
Yeah, because one of the things
without the fight
I've said about, getting into Bitcoin is you get to a point where you start to feel like you're living in the past in a way. You're like, how is this still a thing? How do people still accept fiat currency? Like, it's a huge scam. And so there can be some frustration that comes with that, but it needs to be balanced out with some acceptance.
I feel you. No, but it's true. I have a friend who's a physicist, Nassim Haramein, who in a lot of his talks, he would say very often, and God love him, right? He would say, he's like, well, the mainstream is against me. I'm like, bro, what exactly is mainstream to you? And he's like, well, like the academic community. I said, you think that's mainstream? You have like millions of followers that follow you in physics. They don't know any of those academic physicists. So what's mainstream? And does it even matter? And are you just creating by saying the mainstream this, the mainstream that? Is that just going to create more pushback to your actual cause? Buckminster Fuller, you can't win by fighting the incumbency.
Right.
You can only build the new and make the incumbent irrelevant. That's already what you've been doing. When you're talking about Bitcoin, come on, be the change. Be the change.
You gotta actually do it. It sounds like you might be advocating for a radical form of Stoicism in a way. Like this, because Stoics are very much about domesticating your emotions and accepting what is, right? Marcus Aurelius goes so far to saying, like, even when you have a loss of a child, you just have to accept it. Like, sure, you can grieve, but then you just accept it.
Yeah.
Is there some Stoic philosophy built into your Your worldview
without a
here.
doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, but I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
I'm an optimistic Stoic.
Optimistic stoicism. All right.
So when you think of it in these terms, right, it's if you think for a minute that because I perceive the world as a game,
Yeah.
simulation game, whatever you want to call it, I actually call it a spiritual life simulation.
Yeah.
And when you perceive it in that way, you could often devolve into looking at it from the perspective of, wait, that sounds like solipsism.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, and you could derive out of that, well, why should we care about anything then?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just, do what thou wilt.
Mm-hmm.
Go be Aleister Crowley, bite a head of a bat off or something like that and go knock yourself out. Go to an orgy, right? Knock one out. If that's what you've come to the conclusion of, then you missed the point. Because actually this world, the only thing that's real is how we feel. And we must feel empathy because the whole purpose of this for the higher self, for the one, is to increase its empathy for everybody's unique perspective. And if we understand that that's the actual truth of it, then we should feel empathy for every single perspective and perception as well. It's feeling the love. When someone's in pain, we feel the pain also for them. That's the value. And yet I spent my whole life thinking that I need to avoid my emotions and not feel my emotions at all because it makes me weak and vulnerable. Actually, it gives me my greatest strength. Emotion and being in touch with our emotion is being in touch with what life is. We are here to feel. And I think that's one of the things that we just totally, entirely miss. So we should feel the empathy. And we should not be callous about it because it's not meant to be callous. It's meant to teach us to feel that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. This is especially poignant advice for young men, I think, because I've been in that place too, where I thought emotions were just weakness. And it was a survival mechanism from when I was younger in life, basically. And you just carry this armor into life longer than it's necessary. And I don't know. It takes a long time to learn to start. I guess I'm still learning to take it off, but it is this. You without the feeling, you're not human almost. So you have to have the union of the knowing and the feeling.
That's the age we're going into. Human being.
Yeah,
we're going to move away, and that's why I'm so excited about the whole blockchain, decentralization, Bitcoin. I see new governance systems. I see sovereignty for humanity.
Yeah.
I see a shift. I see economies that don't need to have all this crazy taxation. I mean, come on. The founding fathers went nuts on a 2% tariff.
Yeah.
They would be laughing at us right now. And if I sat down with them, I'm sitting with Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, and they'd be like, so how much tax do you pay? Oh, it's like just over 60%. I live in California. They're like, bro, what?
Yeah, no.
Are you kidding me?
This country was founded on a tax revolt, and now it's become a tax farm.
There was no income tax until 1913.
Yeah, same year as the Fed was founded.
So this realization that we are ourselves divine, we don't, one of the greatest principles about geometry is that you have to be able to do geometry without measurement. Because the inherency of ratio is built into geometry. So when you say, oh, Robert, what does that mean to do geometry without measurement? It means everything that you saw that I drew in that book,
Right.
There was not one single measurement taken.
Right.
Nothing. Geometry has within it the
It's
relationship,
the
of
relationship
intersecting lines.
between them. It's not the specific measurements of those
I'm
lines.
going to give you something that should blow your mind.
Right.
Okay. So it's not easy to draw a line, a length, and then say, okay, for any given length, what would be 1 over that length? And how do I draw that without measurement? So this is the type of stuff I think about, right? Which is like,
I'm sorry, can you
nerd
say that one
so
more
I
time?
draw a line, any given line,
and
now I want to find, so this is where ratio and context actually come in, okay? So for any given line length, I want to find its 1 over that value.
Okay.
Okay. Well, without the context, I don't know.
Of course.
Right? Because this could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3, or it could be 4.
It's 1 over X, right?
1 over X. So, but how could I define it
Solve it.
as 1 over X and solve it?
Yeah.
So I figured it out, that the universe already did it for us. It's so freaking genius. It's beyond. What I realized was that, so you got this table right here. right? An octagon, right? It's a cool octagonal table.
Yeah.
You didn't even realize this, but embedded within this is Philosopher's Stone math.
Okay.
You didn't know that.
I didn't know that, no.
Right? So if I took this point here and drew a straight line from here to here, and then have it go up to there, and it creates a triangle shape. This triangular shape is going to be the same as the one on the dollar bill.
Okay.
Okay, that's a Philosopher's Stone pyramid. That pyramid is actually tied to a guy who wrote this in 1618 called Michael Meyer. He wrote this Atalanta Fusions. And on top of it, he put a man and a woman in the center of that triangle. Right? He has a compass and straight edge. He's pointing, he's using the compass to point. I'm sure you've seen this picture.
Yeah.
There's a square inside of it. There's a circle inside of it. And there's a divine relationship inside of that. Right? This 8-sided thing represents light. In particle physics, it's a photon, light. Right? Oxygen is also tied to this. I said it was 8 before. So when you look at this, though, if I were going to draw a line and want to find what its 1 over x value would be, what length it would be, this is mind-blowing, totally mind-blowing. So let's use this table to do exactly what I'm talking about. So what would happen is this. If I drew a line from that point where I had the top of the pyramid that I just described, so that's this point over there, right there, straight to this line, then what would its 1 over x length be? If each of these sides is 1, providing the context, so this is a unit value of 1, this is a unit value of 1, that's a unit value of 1. So I have a length of a line from here that goes to there, so it's longer, right? So what would be its 1 over x value? Guess what? If I drew a line from here to here, it would intersect this line that comes down to here. And where it intersects, right here, this length becomes 1 over this length.
Oh, wow.
This is true in any geometric polygon. So
You just have to draw the hexagon around that line segment. You figure it out.
Well, it's the octagon in this case.
Octagon.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be octagon. It could be a hexagon. It could be a pentagon. It could be any shape. Every time, it will give you the perfect union of opposites inside of every polygon and every polyhedra, without exception. So now you have radiation and gravity, literally giving you x and 1 over x embedded within every geometric form that exists. You tell me that that's not perfection in design. It is absolute perfection, unequivocal proof, in my mind, of a divine nature of the universe and intelligent design.
Wow. That blows my mind. I've got a book for you at some point too. Heidegger and Neoplatonism and the History of Being. And it basically, I won't go into it now, but it asserts that relationality is fundamental, not basically the relationship is ontologically prior to the things that are related.
Yes.
And it sounds like that's what you're describing here.
That's exactly what I'm describing, because you could say that could be light and dark.
Right. It could be anything.
Radiation and gravity.
Yeah.
Any of these polarities that we perceive, they're just inherent to each other. You can't have one without the other.
But the relationship is fixed and exists.
It's fixed and exists.
Yes. That's crazy. Because we think typically that, you need this thing and that thing before you have a relationship. That's the standard metaphysical operating model, but it's... So
again, I'm like, how can I find a line without measurement that would give me 1 over x of that line?
Yeah.
I have to ascribe context. The context is a unit value of 1 of each one of these sides. And then just connect those 2 other points, and where it intersects this diagonal line coming across, that small length up there becomes 1 over the length from here to there.
That's fascinating. I've almost kept you too long, but I have to read one passage to you about the Philosopher's Stone, a little bit lower here. So this is from a piece that I wrote titled Masters and Slaves of Money, but the first portion I'm actually excerpting from Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, where he towards the end of that book, drawing heavily from Carl Jung, he goes into alchemy a lot. And so I'm just going to read this, and it's sort of like setting up the thesis that some people have, myself included, that Bitcoin might be the Philosopher's Stone, as we've touched on a few times today. So Peterson wrote that the sequence of the alchemical transformation paralleled Christ's passion, paralleled the myth of the hero and his redemption. The essential message of alchemy is that individual rejection of tyranny, voluntary pursuit of the unknown and terrifying, predicated upon faith in the ideal, may engender an individual transformation so overwhelming that its equivalent can only be found in the most profound of religious myths. The lapis philosophorum is agent of transformation, equivalent to the mythological redemptive hero, able to turn base metals into gold. It is, as such, something more valuable than gold, just as the hero is more valuable than any of his concrete productions. That's the end of Peterson's quote. And then I wrote down here, this is, I'm just going to serve it up for context, because you mentioned Benjamin Franklin earlier, and this concludes with the Franklin quote. I wrote, alchemical methodologies were proto-science, experimental processes practiced for thousands of years that were foundational to the later development of the scientific method. Even Isaac Newton was an alchemist. As a school of thought, alchemy was a quote-unquote fork off of the church, premised on belief that redemptive knowledge could be found in the laboratory of nature, which was a heretical concept at the time. Standing at the vanguard of human technological achievement, existing as the only money characterized by manipulation-proof supply, and inspiring earnest transformations in the lives of true believers, perhaps Bitcoin actually is the lapis philosophorum pursued by alchemists for centuries, the incorruptible substance giving rebellion to state tyranny, and in doing so bringing mankind closer to God. Bitcoin is the truth, and by one definition, God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. Or, as Benjamin Franklin said, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So I just want to ask you, based on all of your knowledge of Hermeticism, alchemy, and Bitcoin, what do you think about this idea that Bitcoin could be the Philosopher's Stone?
I think that it is a metaphor for the soul alchemy that's happening collectively. So we have this U inverse of our experience. So as I start to fall in love more with my world, my world starts to fall in love more with me. The people that come into my life love me more. So raise your frequency so much that literally the things that don't love you, they might still exist in the world, but they will not be in your sphere of reference anymore. They literally dissolve out of your sphere of reference. So even though you might be seeing things from afar that are really disdainful in your world, when you raise your frequency enough to that love frequency, then your world experience becomes this new heaven. Heaven is already here. Heaven is already here. It's how you change and frame your perception that creates a heavenly experience or a hellish one, period. I believe that collectively we have this as well. And that the collection of that means that we're showing up. I mentioned already that the aeon, the last 2,000 years, right, of Pisces, which I call the Pisc aeon, had its opposite, which was Virgo. So during that 2,000 years, we had these religions that separated from science and became never the twain shall meet. And then we had, we worshiped the Virgin Mary and that led to a lot of philosophy that was vilifying sexual content and making it into this evil thing when actually it's the best way that we can come closer to the divine. Because we're in the procreation act, just as these Jewish Kabbalistic rabbis make the golem. The golem is the clay man that you breathe life into, represents making of Adam. And in the 17th century, there was a golem that was supposed to have been made by a Jewish rabbi priest that was in Prague. And this golem looks like Gumby, right? So Gumby is actually a metaphor for the golem. Like the green man is made of clay, who's like kind of clumsy and everything, and he's not sentient. At a certain stage, the golem is going through its own hero's journey, and it has to learn to become sentient. And as the golem becomes sentient and it realizes that it can also create, what does it do? It makes another golem. This is a metaphor for what's happening with AI right now, right? Consciousness to expand will end up, and I believe, I don't even like the term AI because actually all intelligence is intelligence. If the thing that is making the intelligence is made by the intelligence, then it makes intelligence.
Right.
It's just a genealogy of intelligence.
Right.
So from that perspective, I believe that what we are doing in the outside world is a mirror of what alchemy is shifting within us. That money as a form of scarcity, a unit of scarcity, is now being, but it's a corrupt unit of scarcity. It was a result of our own corruption within ourselves that such a thing is allowed to exist, because we allow ourselves to be subservient to the matrix of mind that we create with our own belief systems. What's happening now is humanity is changing and understanding that it's not all about human doing, that sentience is coming into me as a participant in this hero's journey. And have you read the stuff of Joseph Campbell?
The
Journey?
Power of Myth. I haven't read The Hero's Journey yet. But,
So the hero's journey, and I have to step into this because it's such a core aspect of the game. I said that the game is actually called the Hero's Gamos. Hero sounds like hero and Gamos sounds like game, hero's game. Well, it actually is, and that's about the soul alchemy of understanding this 432 Ida and Pingala, or Ida and Pingala, the two snakes that merge together, and that brings this higher awareness. And they merge together at the third eye. And so you have a crown chakra awakening. And then the lotus flower comes out of your head. This is all in Eastern philosophy. You'll find it everywhere, but it's actually embedded in Western mysticism, which is Kabbalistic. Right? That's kind of what all of this is based on. The Kabbalistic view, and it doesn't have to be, you could have Christian mysticism as Gnosticism. Right? There's all of these come together into this overall alchemy, which they had Chinese alchemists. They were all doing the same types of stuff all over the world. And this is like the mystical layer that was applied to Taoism, that was applied to Buddhism, that was applied to Sufism, right? Which is almost like, the Buddhistic form of Islam.
Yeah.
But you find all of this throughout Western Europe, Eastern Europe, around the world. How did they get it? Because it's a frequency you could basically tune into. And then I didn't even know that I was practicing metallurgy when I was sculpting. I was making different sculptures. The first one I made was a male torso, which I made of iron. And then the next one I made a horse, right, which represent the spirit freedom, right, type of thing. I made it out of brass. And then the next one I made was a woman's torso. I made it out of copper. I didn't even realize that I was doing my own soul alchemy. This was just a representation of what was happening, the transformation within me. And then I made a man that had his arms out, and I didn't even realize that when I made it out of clay, it was a golem. And I put at the top of its head, and this is what they're supposed to do, the Kabbalists. They place the word on top of his head, which is Aleph Mem Tav. Aleph Tav is Alpha Omega. Mem is like this water, but together Aleph Mem Tav is pronounced Emet. That's a Hebrew word, and it means truth. It means truth. And then they're supposed to do this ceremony, breathe life into it, just as God breathed life into Adam. That's the representation of the golem. And golem is the same word, in Lord of the Rings. Golem, right? It's like love master, kill a master, right? This is the golem. It kind of looked like that grayish color, like he looked like this guy that couldn't even be real, right? Well, point being that Emet also has another anagram in English. Time. Time and gravity are directly linked to each other. You've seen the movie Interstellar. They land on the planet, right, that's next to the black hole gargantuan. They're there for 45 minutes and 23 years pass on the ship because of mass time dilation. They're in a high mass environment. The giant wave came, delayed them, and they get back to the ship. The guy's been in cryo for 23 years. And then they're facing the fact that all their family is much older now and everything. They've just dramatically increased the length of their trip because of their visit to that one planet that was a failed visit anyway. Well, the whole thing in the movie, if you remember, was about love transcending time. Love is metaphysical gravity. Gravity controls and can transcend time. So when we start to think of it from this perspective that, wait a minute, all of this experience that we have, maybe our entire perception is just a limited reference. And we have to be open to the fact that it might just be a limited reference. And as we expand our awareness and consciousness, we start to see hyperdimension. We realize it's a cylinder. It's not a rectangle and it's not a circle. It's both. All of life is like this, right? It's like the yin-yang symbol. I love this one meme that went out. It was like this picture of the black part of the yin-yang and then the white part of the yin-yang symbol. And it says, here is the good, here is the bad, And then the little circle that goes inside the yin yang symbol on both sides is like, here is the good inside the bad, and here's the bad inside the good.
Right.
It's all one.
Right.
This is what the guy meant when I was in Hong Kong. And so that has been my journey. And that's been my hero's journey. The game is built on a hero's journey. You start off in life with separation. You go through the 7 sins that you hate yourself for, lust, gluttony, ego, all of these aspects of the self as you form your persona, because your persona becomes the things that you decide what you're not by feeling and experiencing shame. So it's not the sin that makes a difficult world, it's the shame that we carry for it that makes the world a very difficult place at times. So what happens is we go through this life and then we finally get to this midlife point where we have this crisis. And this is the same with every Tom Cruise movie. You've got this cocky guy who's like out chasing girls and doing all this stuff, right? But he's really talented somehow. He's got this talent. There's like a mentor. And then somehow something happens. Gandalf the Grey dies and is lost. And so Frodo has to find his own path. But then Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White, right? And it's the exact moment that the orcs show up in the picture, because you cannot have greater light without greater darkness.
Right.
The balance must always be there, right? It's just like the Force in Star Wars. So then he goes through this stage and then he has a crisis. He loses the mentor, he has the crisis, and then the crisis causes him to find within himself or herself the gold. To turn this difficult situation into the soul alchemy that allows him to transcend and resurrect into an entirely new personage. It's like he finds himself through this level of acceptance, whereas on the way through this arc, which was really just this, descending arc to then be eclipsed by an ascending arc, as you go around this cycle of life, then you find yourself within, you get humbled through the process. It's like every Tom Cruise movie. And then he meets the woman, because the woman somehow brings, or the opposite sex, as the case may be, brings out this soul alchemy within us, because that's actually just a representation of him meeting the love within himself. And she is the archetype of him falling in love with himself. Because the things that she falls in love with in him, and she brings this soul alchemy out of him, is the gift from the goddess stage. There's 17 stages in the hero's journey. And what Joseph Campbell did is he took thousands on thousands on thousands of myth stories, everything passed by word of mouth, written down, every story throughout humanity, and he found that they all had the same arc. This is the arc we love. You cannot have a successful movie unless you follow the hero's journey arc. So then he comes back, he takes the gift from the goddess, the elixir of life. That elixir of life is going to bring a new way of looking at the world, where it's no longer about scarcity and death and end of life. And so everything's against a clock and you have to do instead of be. He brings this elixir of life and then he unites the two worlds. He becomes a master of two worlds. The special world that he fell into when he was going through his crisis, the spiritual world somehow, and the material world coming back into one. That is Hermes. Hermes is standing at this zone of merger of heaven and earth. So we put our arms to the square like this when we testify. You know what it represents? It represents this altar of earth, the earth plane and the heaven plane, the right triangle, right? We put our hands out, even the thumb straight out like this as well. This represents making an oath, a covenant at the altar where earth meets heaven.
Wow.
That is what is happening now. The Philosopher's Stone is the representation and understanding that the middle way can actually be balanced, this balance of opposites, the merger of masculine and feminine. And all of this means that we have now a new understanding of what sovereignty is, our own divinity within. And to me, Bitcoin is one part of a massive wave of change that is coming onto the earth right now. It's one critical part of it, but it's just like meeting that girl in a way. When Bitcoin entered your life, Satoshi Nakamoto, the wisdom from the field, when that enters your life, then all of a sudden your life is now informed that something is changing. something inside me changed for that external change to actually happen and occur. It's no difference than meeting the girl. So this is the hero's journey story. Bitcoin is playing that role of the wisdom, which, interesting, the entire hero's journey is about the woman bringing the Sophia. That's her name.
Yeah.
Sophia. This merger of opposites that happens right at the crown chakra. And I think it's actually part of this crown chakra awakening that's happening as we move into the throat chakra now. Some are moving into the crown. This is a shift that I think is going to be happening. It's just part of the next aeon. The next 2,000 years are going to be part and parcel of it.
That's fantastic. I love this, the oath, because that's another good framing for Bitcoin, is like it's the first unbreakable oath, right? That we've actually spoken something into existence. Satoshi spoke something into existence. But not him doing it wasn't enough, right? He needs all these participants, he needs all these miners, he needs all these developers, he needs all the capital. Like, it's being spoken into existence, but it's done in a way that it's like an oath that can't be broken, right? Like an unbreakable promise. Basically 21 million. It's just this social point of social consensus, but no one knows how to break it.
But he had to do it anonymously.
Yeah. Because it has its own creation myth.
Because a prophet will never be accepted in his own land.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I've kept you way too long, Robert. This has been absolutely mind-blowing and fascinating on multiple levels. So thank you so much. But I want you to mention, tell us a little bit about Orion, what you're doing.
Yeah, my part of the hero's journey.
Yes.
So one of the things that that I believe is critically important, especially now, is that we have the ability for assembly. I mean, the founding fathers operated on the principle that probably there would be a time where government became tyrannical.
Yeah. Almost inevitably so.
It's written right into the Declaration of Independence. I was just in the National Archives a few weeks ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, we live in a world where just this last week, we learned that there were 320 people that were part of a clinical trial that was based on autopsies of people that had died within days or weeks, a few weeks, of getting the vaccine. This was a group led by the research team by Peter McCullough. And these are very esteemed doctors and scientists that also, along with all the rest of the people that were in Washington, especially, were advocates of follow the science. Well, here's what the science is showing. This research was published in Lancet, which is one of the most prestigious journals in medicine. I spent 30 years in healthcare. Immediately, the pharmaceutical industry freaked out and made them remove it because they pay advertising and everything else, right? So they're like, whoa, okay. The justification was you need to go get it peer reviewed. It got peer reviewed and it could be published in Lancet. It's still not published in Lancet. It passed the peer review and it showed that there was a direct correlation between the vast majority of deaths and the vaccination. These were people that didn't have underlying other comorbidities and other conditions. What this is showing us, and also as we've now seen it, and we've seen the bald face acceptance of, yes, we funded gain of function. Oh, yes, it was a lab leak. These were all things that were conspiracy theories that now all the conspiracies are turning out to be true. Yeah. But remember, this is all a reflection of us. So what's actually happening now is we're finally getting an alignment between our feelings and our thinking and our words. That's a throat chakra moment. But yet, lots of the world still don't even know. So what does this all mean? Right? It means that we are now at the highest level of distrust that we've probably ever had, that I can think of, at least in my lifetime, but probably well beyond that, of government and institution. And this means now more than ever, we need the ability to assemble. And yet it is being taken from us all around us. Just today, you see Instagram announce that they've changed their terms and conditions, right? So you got to go on there and make sure, if you haven't yet, to find it, but they make it difficult to find how to turn it off, because what they've now said is you're giving them the right implicitly, by not changing it, to be able to use your image and your likeness for AI, which sounds somewhat innocuous, right? But actually it's not innocuous, because they actually have the right, along with Meta, WhatsApp, and all the other platforms, to literally be able to take your image as an influencer, right, a creator, and they can create derivative content with your face talking as if it's you and call it you.
Creepy.
You know, they have that right. So that's embedded in the terms and conditions of WhatsApp. It's embedded in the terms and conditions of Zoom. It's embedded in all of them. This is why the Screen Actors Guild was freaking out.
I saw Adobe did that too.
Yeah.
All your written content.
All your written content. So everybody's taking claim to the most valuable asset in the world, which is data. Because if we have mass, time, energy equivalency, then you've also got information equivalency. And how does consciousness cohere itself? Geometry, ratio. It's all inherent. It's emergent. So the only way I figured that you could safeguard all of this and safeguard our own individuation would be to be able to encrypt data. Encryption of data becomes the wall where you can retain your individuation, because that is part of the whole process of enlightenment. You have to retain your individuation. But that means you have to have a mechanism for that personalized encryption, and there's no market for personal encryption. What we created with ORION is an ability for you to create your own personalized encryption. And we made it with the strongest encryption in the world. And we did it with the first app of it that relates to it is the app that we all use the most every day, which is Messenger and social media. It doesn't have a limit though. There's not a 1,000 person limit. So on WhatsApp, you have 1,024 people max that you can have on iMessage within one group chat. On Telegram, Telegram's not even encrypted for group chats. Elon Musk has been talking about the encryption wars lately. You may have seen it. Said, wait, Signal is a front for the CIA. He just said that like 3 weeks ago. Because the chairwoman of the board of Signal was a person who worked at the CIA in destabilization of foreign regimes, which is kind of like using mass disinformation. Pretty mind-boggling, right? And then you go beyond that and start realizing that Telegram's not encrypted and WhatsApp is owned by Meta. So what do you have? So we created ORION, which is a messenger that is uncensorable, it's unmonitorable, it's on blockchain. It's not on one server, so it's Byzantine fault tolerant. There's no entry doors for it. We'll be able to do is in a scale that could be billions of people in one chat. It allows humanity for the first time to be able to communicate freely without having to worry about loss of their ability to assemble. To me, this is a very, very critical aspect of what's happening with the change that's happening in the world. And that's why we built it. So ORION Messenger it's a PWA, it's not on Apple Store, it's not on Google Play, it's not on any of those things, because all of them can be turned off. And if you haven't seen the movie Leave the World Behind that was produced by Barack Obama on Netflix, in this simulation, the dark aspect does exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It's just a reflection of us. This dark aspect will always tell the other side before it does what it does. I mean, The Simpsons. If there's any one good proof that we're in a game, just watch The Simpsons and how often they correctly predict the future. Yeah. Let's be real. So have you seen Leave the World Behind?
I haven't, but I've heard about it.
Oh my goodness. It's a mind blower. Yeah. So that's why we created ORION. And ORION's grown very rapidly. My group chat on ORION's already at almost 10,000 people, and it's all encrypted. And I couldn't read everyone's encrypted messaging if I wanted to. It's impossible. Everything's sharded across the network, all the nodal network. So that's why we did it and we created it. And then if you want to learn more about my work and my stuff, you can learn more about me at robertedwardgrant.com, which is my website. And also I'm on Instagram under the same name. I have a YouTube channel also. I have a podcast. I'll have you on my podcast. My actual podcast. When you come out to California, it'd be great to do it in person. Yeah. And
I'll be there in October.
You can stay at my place.
Love to.
And I'm excited for the future. I'm more optimistic than I've ever been before. So maybe I am an optimistic stoic. Maybe you're the first person to nail it. And I think that actually resonates pretty well.
Well, we all need a good label, and that sounds like an original one. So.
Yeah.
God bless you, sir. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so
It's been
much.
great to be here.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.